All right, everybody. Welcome to episode 176 of Victory Never Sleeps. Oera Linda Book, question mark. Question mark was not my idea, but the Allsherjargoði thought it was better framing for it. Top of the show things before we get started. First, of course, is the dedication of Phrasehoff coming up in 2.5 weeks, December 6th, Austintown, Ohio. You can RSVP at runestone.org/store. It is free. It's pretty much just registering so we can get a head count for meals and seating and such. I'll be there. Allsherjargoði will be there. Much of the Witan, a good chunk of Njordshof district will be there. Gothi Mayo and I will be riding up together. We will be bringing the statue of Lord Freyr to give to the Hofgothi of Phrasehoff, Witan Eriksson, as part of the altar there. Let's see. Phrasehoff Fund, I think we're almost a third of the way paid off already, thanks to you guys' incredible generosity. That's pretty awesome. The sooner we get that paid off, the sooner we can start working on Tiershoff, which is really exciting. Remember to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, comment questions or in general so the algorithm shows us to more people. Share this on X, Rumble, Facebook, and Instagram if you're allowed on there still. Places like that. One last thing. We have calendars for 2026 worked on mainly by Witan Facet and her team in our operations group. They look awesome. Get them sooner rather than later because supplies are limited. With that, we'll go ahead and get into the Oera Linda book. Before I give Chris the go-ahead to kind of talk about the history of it and all that, I want to start by saying I know that a lot of people are invested in the Oera Linda book, especially in our sphere, I guess, because there is a lot of, like any good work of fiction, there's a lot of truth in it. That's not to say that the whole thing is real. Spoiler alert, it is not. I don't say that to be flippant. I don't want to do this in a way where, it's me and Chris pointing and laughing at people for believing in something that was presented to them as real. Our people specifically have this tendency, and it usually contributes to the greater good rather than otherwise, but we have this tendency to always want to find the hidden knowledge in something, always want to dig down to the bottom of whatever is happening. And that trait of ours has given us so many things, including this screen I'm talking into, and you guys get to hear it tens or hundreds or thousands of miles away. It's a wonderful trait to have, and I don't ever want to admonish anybody for using that and stumbling upon the Oera Linda book and believing it because it is fantastical and because it has, again, some truth in it. Any good or even decent propaganda is going to have some pretty decent amount of truth sprinkled in there to kind of lure you in. Is there going to be a William or a Lucy sighting tonight? William is asleep, and I would bet Lucy is as well.
Lucy is heading off to bed.
Yeah.
You'll see her. Don't worry, Ron. Don't worry.
Yeah. We'll see in a couple weeks, actually.
But not tonight. Not tonight.
Yeah, ideally, William will stay asleep. He had a little nightmare or something a minute ago right before he went live. Thankfully, he's out. Anyway, Chris, will you walk us through the kind of history, origins, background, whatever of the Oera Linda book?
Sure. So the Oera Linda book is a text that posits itself as being the true history of Europe and its descendants from the matriarchal, monotheistic ancient Dutchmen who descended from Atlantis 4,000 years ago. That's a bit of a mouthful. We're going to unpack it in detail. So to start with, let's kind of, rather than just trashing on this book, I want to start by saying what I think it is, if you look at it honestly in light of all of the just facts about it. It is a work of what we would today refer to as theory fiction, which complex allegory that is trying to convey a philosophy, theology, or ideology through fiction. Plato does this a lot with like the Ring of Gyges or Gyges, with Atlantis, crafting these elaborate stories to convey a point that aren't necessarily completely, this is fake, I'm making this up, right? But are also not necessarily supposed to be real. In the Oera Linda Book's case, that couldn't have been, we'll get into the story of the actual textual history of the book and why the authors, plural, ultimately couldn't come clean about all of it. So as I said, this text purports to be the true history of Europe and its descendants, and its descent from the matriarchal monotheistic golden age caused by the ancient Dutchmen descending from Atlantis 4,000 years ago. The book, Oera Linda, is an attempt at archaicizing Old Dutch to, so the book was produced to the public by, I am not a Frisophobe, I have no rancor against the Dutch people, but I'm not going to pronounce any of these names or words correctly. Please forgive me in advance, but it's Dutch. So in the 1850s, Cornelis Over de Linde, that's his surname, Over de Linde, produces this book that he claims was given to him by his aunt, who was giving it to him on behalf of his grandfather as part of his inheritance. This book had been passed down through the Over de Linde family for dozens of generations, with them being the last keepers of this ancient knowledge. Over de Linde's family, as the Oera Linda, Over de Linde, Oera Linda, right, lineage show up prominently in the text as keepers of lore that go on to become, you know, Cornelis Over de Linde revealing this book to the public for the first time, right? So Cornelis then brings it to a man by the name of Ilko Verwijs, who is a provincial archivist in the province that he lived in. So this is kind of like the Register of Deeds meets a college. We don't really have a core equivalent to this at the time, but it's basically a government office for recording things and bringing things to the attention of scholars. So Ilko initially rejects it, but he ends up passing it on to a scholar by the name of Johan Winkler. Winkler gives a copy to Jan Gerhardus Otema. Otema, go on, sir.
Jan Otma.
Okay, is that how that's pronounced?
That one was particularly egregious.
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to make fun of the Dutch here. I promise. I don't know anything about this language. I'm sorry, guys.
No, they understand.
So Jan Otma is the ideological founder of the authenticist position. Otma is the one that begins the idea that this is a real, true story that has been hidden from the world by dark, shadowy forces, and it coming back to public understanding is a crucial salvo by the forces of good. So
The principal text on this book is Die Gemaskerde God by Goff Jensma, who is a Dutch academic. Part of the problem with this text is that part of the problem with the study of the Oera Linda book is that this academic work has not been translated to English formally. It is in Dutch. The PDF I have of it is 467 pages, entirely in Dutch. So this is an esoteric and arcane text that is not really accessible to English academia because it's literally not in English, right? I had to use internet translation to even access a lot of this material because a lot of the information about this text is not in English. There are English translations of the Oera Linda book, but like talking about the language, there's nothing on the language of the book in English. Goff Jensma is not a believer in the authenticity of the book. Spoiler warning. The book, the article here, Die Gemaskerde God might as well be a book unto itself, given how big it is. But this Die Gemaskerde God article book is absolutely not in favor of the authenticity of this text. So let's just back up and talk about the book a little bit, like the physical artifact. So it's 158,000 characters, 38,000 words, 6,000-ish lines. It's about 190 pages on folded sheets in 9 quires. That's basically, a quire is if you take a bunch of paper, fold it in half, right? Then you have several of those in a line and they get glued to the spine of a book. So due to how the formatting is set up, because this book was made by hand, if it was made today, it would be about 110 pages. The make and style of the book are consistent with bookmaking in the 1800s. The physical copy of the book, the original artifact, which is accessible by scholars, it's like in a museum, it claims to be from 1256 AD, but it is on machine-made paper from the 1850s. Machine, not like LaserJet or something, but it was made in a paper factory in Friesland. The Jensma even like tracked down the literal building the paper came from. It's consistent with samples from that factory from that time. The writing is with modern, for the 1800s, ink using a steel pen or quill. Pencil was used for sketching and arranging. I should have done this before. Can you get a picture of the Oera Linda book runes and throw it up there, Nick? I can keep talking while you do. It was never bound properly, but it was made to look as if it was, as if it had been like taken out of its original binding and then put back into it. So the margins are measured with a compass and mark. The justification is at right margin via tildes, but it's done poorly with odd word breaks. The text has non-disruptive gaps in the narrative to create an illusion of age. So it's like you're reading Genesis and then all of a sudden, like the part where it talks about Jacob stealing Esau's birthright or whatever is just like missing. And then it just keeps going, right? So the book itself is written in the Frisian runes, which are a novel writing system based off of medieval majuscule. They have nothing to do with the Futhark, and they match the writing system of then modern 1850s Dutch. So like, there's like a form. So one of the letters in that form of Dutch is an A with a diacritic. Here we go. They're based on this idea that there's like a thing at the bottom, right? That little circle kind of thing is all of the letters are contained within that, right? and you can make all of the letters off of this thing. The circle is an important symbol. It's called the yole. The yole, the circle, is an important symbol for the society described in the book. So if you look at those top left 3 letters, those are all A, but with diacritics, right? You can go look at the Futhark and ancient Greek writing to see how ancient peoples treated vowels. Diacritics are something that the French invented in the 1600s. Well, okay, the French didn't actually invent them, but the way they show up in this, what this text is doing, comes from French invention, right? So what's important is that these start out very angular and very rigid, but they round over time, which is not consistent with someone who knows how to write in a hand consistently. Like, yes, if you write an entire book by hand, every single R that shows up is not going to be the same, but they're all going to look vaguely similar. The drift indicates that the writer of the book, writers, there's multiple, were slowly learning how to make these, literally, they were muscle memorying how to make these characters over time. There's a lot of smudges, attempts at correcting, attempts at scratching out, sometimes literally, like removing paper, like a layer of paper to remove an error because the scribes were not used to writing in this script. But it doesn't show the extreme attention to detail and precision that someone who is attempting to copy a text that they don't know how to interpret shows. This shows up very often in medieval texts where you often hear Christians talk about like monks preserving knowledge. That was usually done by people who were illiterate because scriptoria had to be reinvented as Europe entered the Dark Ages, and they would basically go to peasants and say, you see all these sheets with the little scribbles? Make an exact copy. And so there's an entire science to what do letters look like if they're made by someone who is illiterate and is just copying from memory. Jews do this with the Torah, where it has to look extremely specific, or a single character can make an entire Torah scroll have to be just tossed away because it has to be specifically right. And the drift in this does not line up with the story that Oera Linda gave about this being basically his family's religion passed down for literally like 4,000 years, and defending and saving and copying and preserving this knowledge was supposed to be this great family endeavor, which doesn't really seem to bear out. So as I said, the claim is that the book itself comes from 1256, but the paper is obviously from 1850. Part of that obvious is that it has been artificially aged through chemical means. If you take the paper and like snip it, it's white in the center. It's even been like burnt a few times. So also, if you look in these, I don't blame you for not being able to see it in, I don't know where I'm pointing, in the image on the screen, it has ligatures, THNG. These are things that came about due to how Latin handles these letters. The Futhark has a character, I believe it's the Ingvaz one, that makes the sound ng. It makes a distinction between ng and ng. So like finger was initially pronounced finger. Finger is a regular phonological process, blah, blah, blah. The fact that it doesn't make this distinction is a demonstration that there is a drawing from the Latin script, right? Because is a distinct phoneme from n. This key is from the 46th page, but the book says that the writing is supposed to be secret and not shown to outsiders. The letter order reflects 19th century academic theories. It's not based on the alpha beta decarium or the Futhark. The order the letters are in matters and actually demonstrates the origin of a script. So at first, the only punctuation is a dot, and it's not a period, it's like a dot if you've seen really old Greek, you'll recognize what I'm talking about. But eventually commas start leaking in. And spoiler, Cornelis Oera Linda had extremely odd views on how to use a comma that show up in this book. Now, granted, perhaps he got them from the book, but they start showing up in the book. They aren't a consistent feature. So, again, I don't want to be mean and just poo-poo on this book, but it's really hard to when you are a language nerd and look at this thing. So the language of the Oera Linda book is archaicized modern Dutch. The best example I could thinketh of is when people try to do ye olde Englisheth, and they talk like this, and they put a random e'ths and ifs at the end of every word. The reason they're doing that is because they don't understand how, for one, Middle English was pronounced, but also because verbs, you can take the picture down, Nick. They also don't understand how verbs conjugated in Middle English. So like in Middle English, you would say, I think, you thinkest, he, she, it thinketh. Thinks comes from a Southern dialectical variation on th. Shakespeare actually uses both when doing accents. So characters from the south of England will say thinketh, and characters from the north of England will say thinketh. Ye olde, the ye in ye is actually supposed to be a thorn or an eth, but the printing press was made in Germany, which didn't use the thorn or the eth for that matter. And so when printing presses were imported to England, they were imported from Germany. And what scribes had started to do is they had started to modify the thorn to look like a Y. Spoiler warning, you see what's not on this page? A thorn. You see what is on this page? Raido, or a capital R. You know what Greek does not have? Raido, or capital R. That shape, whatever, you can see the R on there. That comes from a modification of a West Greek alphabet because rho made a w sound in West Greek. There are multiple Greek alphabets. Classicists normalize them to Attic to make reading Greek easier, so you don't have to figure out which script are we reading this in. So that's a telltale sign that this comes out of Western Europe. Granted, the book claims that Europeans come out of the Netherlands, so okay, but as I was saying, the y in ye olde is supposed to be the olde. The e is a nominative suffix. Anyways, the fact that most people don't know what I just said is why it's glaringly obvious that the text is not ancient, because it's being written in what people in the 1850s in the Netherlands thought was old. It's not being written in a archaic language. Compare modern English and ye oldest English, according to how modern English speakers think it was said back then, to Old English, where there are not just different words, like the modern English word, like shrithe instead of move, because move comes from Latin. There's not just different words and vocabulary, but there's different syntax and grammar. The Oera Linda book doesn't have nouns that inflect for case, right? Like the Oera Linda book does not have a dual number. The Oera Linda book has grammar that looks like modern Dutch and syntax that looks like modern Dutch. But it does have occasional archaisms thrown in on the grammar, akin to Trent, thou speakest, right? We don't inflect verbs for the second person singular anymore because blah 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 blah. So the language is entirely modern Dutch with archaisms meant to mimic Middle Dutch that is in modern Dutch syntax. As an example, in Spanish, if you want to say it was utilized, you would say se utilizaba, excuse me, which is not a construction we use in English. We don't use the reflexive pronoun to do mediopassive voice. There's no kind of syntactic differences in the Oera Linda book that you wouldn't see if you just knew Dutch. You know what Old English has? Pretty grievous syntactic differences from English, from modern English. So the book is also, as I said, full of errors. There's also typos, like of the fake words. Like it misspells words that it makes up, right? Now, granted, people make typos, but you know, there is an editor who went through apparently in like a batch that tried to correct a lot of this stuff, which again could have been done in 1256. The problem, some of the typos are also ones that would never be made by a native. Like it makes typos like between N and M, like spelling mom, N-O-N. That wouldn't happen, right? These accelerate in the second half. The book has a bipartite structure where the first half is this fantastical tale with all sorts of really interesting stuff going on. And then the second half is this slog. Kind of like imagine if the catalog of ships in Homer just kept going for the rest of the book, right? But it's not just, and then Glaukokles, his ship was the Piercer, and on it he brought Agafmachman, and it's like an actual story that keeps going in a different diction, right? So the writers lost steam and lost time and had to wind down the narrative as it enters into early antiquity, 590 BC, and later antiquity, 313 BC. So let's talk about the world and society that this book purports, unless you have anything you want to say, sir, while I drink tea.
Yeah, real quick, just before I forget. Thank you to G.W. Farnsworth for donating 25 to VNS and 50 to the Phrasehoff Fund. Your generosity at any level makes a difference, but generosity every single week for the past 6 million weeks or whatever it's been is greatly appreciated. Thank you. And that is Njordshof District representing, so double appreciated. Yeah, as far as the Oera Linda book history thing, one thing I want to throw in here, and it may be on your notes, and I may be jumping the gun, but it's what I found particularly interesting, and it'll sort of flesh out kind of some of the background once we get to the theological stuff. 1850s or 60s, whenever it was, in the Netherlands when this was coming around, those of you who are extreme continental Europe history buffs will kind of recognize this as a time when Catholicism and Protestantism, sort of high church versus low church, were really clashing, especially in this region. Catholicism was sort of making a comeback, and the Protestants were really unhappy about it because Catholicism is mean and not Jewish enough or some such. And yeah, if I explain any further, it'll just give away the plot to the Oera Linda book, essentially. But yeah, just something to keep in mind that sort of the setting that this was written in or discovered in.
And to whet the audience's beaks, not only is there Catholicism v. Protestantism, but there's Protestantism v. Protestantism, and that also matters here. So the world that this story purports, as I said, the land of Atlantis, Ataland, or occasionally Atland, sinks, and then the Frisians make landfall in Frisia first. Like that's where white people start in the Netherlands, and then they spread outwards into Germany and Scandinavia. I think Scandinavia is like Scotenland or something. But so the world proposes that there is, or the story proposes that there is one God, Weralda, which apparently, if you're Dutch, that obviously means like one over or like one over all or something. It's God, monotheistic God. There's one deity. There's no Trinity, however. There's just one God. This one God makes the three mothers. I'm trying to find where in my notes I put their names.
So yeah, I'm gonna jump in for this part because I've listened to so many videos on this particular thing. The Allsherjargoði videos were interesting in particular. So yeah, there's supposed to be three matrons, I guess, of the three broad races of humanity. There is everybody pronounces it Freya, but I would argue it's pronounced Freya because that's what the Dutch would have called Frigg, and it's spelled that way, and it makes sense with
notice free. Keep that in your head. Free.
Yeah. But yeah, so the matron of white people was Frigg or Freya, as the Saxons and Frisians and other West Germanic peoples would have called her. But Freya. Of the African people, like just black people, the matron was Lida, something like that. And then the Asian and Semitic, I think the Semitic peoples as well, their matron was Fenda. We can go over it here, but if just in case we don't, I would encourage all of you to go read the descriptions of those three matrons and how they're like representatives of each of those people groups. It's sad, but also funny and more honest than a modern audience would be comfortable with. But I think you guys might enjoy it.
And there's like a three bears with the beds in the porridge, like Lida's children are just too hot-blooded and unintellectual, but Finda's children, they're really smart and cunning, but they just have this thing with tyranny. But Freya's children were just right? And you'll notice here an interesting little thing. This is made by a Dutchman. I, as an American, when I think of like crude colored descriptions of races, it's white, black, yellow, red.
Yeah.
Notice there's no red men here, which is, I presume, given how broad Asia is in this tale, that they would just lump under Finda's children in this cosmology. But it is an interesting little like quirk dating that I picked up on as an American. So as we said, there's these three races of people: white people, yellow, just going to call them yellow people, and black people. And white people's society is a matriarchal, democratic, constitutionalist communism. Communism, not in the sense of Marxism or like Marxist-Leninism or anything, but in the sense of like they live on communes. They live in like a kind of they sleep in a shared barracks. Specifically, they don't live in villages at first. They live in like fortress citadels, and then they're given plots of land by the government to go out and farm, but these aren't inherited. It's only later that the Frisians start developing like private property. The comparison to Plato's Republic is kind of apt here in that it's like an entire society of the guardians, where they like live in barracks. They have like a box that they get to keep possessions in, but it's not lockable. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's very commune. Everyone owns everything and no one owns nothing, kind of a thing, right?
You kind of get into it reading it, and you're like really feeling how like Dutch this writing is after a while.
So as I said, it's a matriarchy. There's one god, Weralda, who is called like something. It's All Father. It's like Alvader, but like mangled. It's just All Father. So I presume Waralda is supposed to be male, but it's a matriarchal society. Women are favored over men. Men are supposed to keep their hot-blooded, tyrannical ways under check. Women are supposed to just like let go and be free. There's no inheritance, as I said, which is also an interesting thing that we'll come back to. People don't own property in this early utopian society that is formed after the fall of Ataland. And I'm just going to presume this is how they lived on Ataland as well, just for ease. It's focused on clarity, freedom, resistance to priestly tyranny. That's an important point that we'll come back to later. But so they do have folksmodders, who are their priestesses. They're kind of like a mixture of Vestal virgins and rabbis. They are Vestal. Their founder was a woman named Festa. She taught them to remain chaste, wear white robes, and tend sacred fires. And that is like the sum total of their official state religiosity. Their religion is very Tolkien afterwards. Like if you read Tolkien, no one ever prays. No one makes sacrifices. No one does like communion. There's just these kind of like heartfelt affirmations of value and loyalty and singing, but no one like gets down on their knee and hails the day or like declares their loyalty to the creator or anything like that. So it's actually a remarkably atheistic society or secular society in a certain sense, other than this heavy focus on these fire-tending rabbinesses. I say rabbinesses because they are given a law. Where is it in my notes? The text. The written text. Get it? Text. Where do I have it in here? So, this is a totally literate society. Everyone can read, and thus they can read the text. They can read the text because if they are also there's the text which is given to them by Freya, but they're also allowed to make their own laws, which is interesting because Muslims don't believe you can make a law, like Orthodox fundamental Muslims. And there's a lot of Orthodox Jews who would agree, like, yeah, you can't make a law. Laws are made by Yahweh, right? If a law is in play for like 100 years, they add it. They like literally carve it on their citadel walls, right? They are guided by Ewa, an interreligious law derived from the monistic and monotheistic deity. Waralda is in everything, but also above everything. It's not it's not panentheism, it's not pantheism, but it is monism, because Waralda is in everyone and everything. Friday is a holy day, which is another tell. The 7-day week comes from the planetary hours, which is in ancient Babylon. If you looked up, they didn't invent light pollution and microplastics yet. So you could look up in the sky and see the stars, and they would move in this big like disc that turns throughout the year. But then in the disc, there's these wandering little dots that move differently from the turning of the disc. And the Greeks knew that the dots that move in the disc are the asterai, the stars. What do you call a wandering star? Planetos asterai, wandering star, planet. So the Babylonians recognized this, and they saw that there were 7 of them, the 7 classical planets. So each hour of the day, because a day is 24, because you know what, you have 2 hands. You can count to 20, you can count to 10 on your fingers, right? You can count to 12 on one hand if you count the digits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 24. 24 hours in a day, each is guided by a planet, right? So like 3 p.m. today is the hour of Jupiter. Then 4 p.m. is the next in the series, going from closest to farthest. But wait a minute. wait a minute. 7 times 3 is 21. There's 3 days left. So each day there's 3 hours left. So each day starts 4 planets ahead. Huh. Well, that planet is the planet of the day. You know what that day is? The day of the planet. So Friday is their holy day, named after they're named after Freya, this mother prophetess figure. Friday comes from Frigg's Day, That itself is it comes about in like the 1500s, like 150 AD. The Anglo-Saxons decide to adopt this system from the Romans. This happens really early. You can tell because of how the words are. So Frigg's Day comes from the Dies Veneris, the day of Venus. Dies Veneris comes from the Hemera Aphrodite, the day of Aphrodite. This comes from the planetary hours because Aphrodite is Venus, the planet Venus in this scheme. It's her palace or her chariot. Ancient astronomers weren't certain whether the stars were the gods, their houses, or their vehicles, but doesn't really matter. The planet Venus is Aphrodite, right? So this actually does line up. Theoretically, it could have come from the Frisians and go to the Babylonians, but it's like there's no reason to attach Freya to Friday independent of Friday being Frigg's Day, right? The social setup is a lot like biblical Israel in that there's a theoretical like master plan, like a tree where things flow out. There's the Levites, like a priest caste of these women who perform these rites that normies don't do. They interpret the text. They have judicial authority. That's another thing. Die Folks Matters have judicial authority. They are rabbis in the sense of they are judges. Juditrixes, whatever. Top-down organization of localities by a central judicial model. And this is another thing in the Bible. There's a lot of consternation amongst the Jews about like cities as like a discrete unit, which is found in these like communistic citadel fortresses as like a discrete unit. They are, however, despite having a unelected priestly judiciary, democratic constitutional city-states, as I said, with elections and citizenship and universal legal equality and prohibitions on inheritance and banditry and firearms ownership. There's stuff about, I won't get into the lung disease, I'll get to that later. They have vast and complex irrigation and drainage engineering 4,000 years before the Dutch invented that, because their country is mostly underwater. So, as I said, the religion is remarkably modernist, capital M modernist. There's a denial of miracles. Nature and history are riddles that God wants us to solve. Monism. Diversity belies unity in God and with God. Struggle and inquiry are tools to find the truth. There's gender egalitarianism. It's literally a matriarchy, right? So, just spoiler warning, where do gods come from? Where does Odin fit into this? The gods of Europe are euhemerized Frisians. So like Athens is founded by Minerva, who is a human woman. Woden is a German chieftain who rejects the text and all that. It also goes on with stuff like Jesus and Buddha. Like all modern religions descend from ancient Frisian wisdom. Jesus was just repeating the ancient teachings of the Frisians. And if you look hard enough, you can find the truth. It treats polytheistic deities, and I mean, to like a degree, like axial age prophets, like jokes. Buddha, he didn't have any original ideas. It's all Frisia. That's a joke. But it treats Weralda with dead theological seriousness and academic rigor. Weralda is God. Like, in the way an 1850s academic Protestant would go into a college and talk to theology students about God, right? This is a bit more about their theology and society. My notes are really scattered on this. I apologize. So there's descent from three mothers, whites, yellows, blacks. There's a 3,000-year freedom and slavery cycle, right? There's a contradiction between man's desire for man's nature as free and man's desire for tyranny, which we'll get into. God is above and in the world. Science reads God's thoughts. Reason and morality are innate and from God. And every time I say God here, just insert "we're all" because it's just Control F replace. That's just what it is. Sorry. So there's three stages of progress that we see in this text. There's a state of nature, a legal state, and then inner moral freedom and conscience. Keep that word in your mind, conscience. That's important. So where does it all go wrong? Because when we see Frisia show up in the historical record, it is, no offense, Dutchman, I don't mean to be rude, but a relatively minor lowland coastal province that is harassed by its neighbors. So where does it all go wrong? The answer is in the great enemy, the Magi. I won't use the P word here. The Magi. The Magi are this secret, like, priestly conspiracy, and they take over the Magyars and enslave the Finns. And the Finns are the super weapon used against the Frisians. So there's a great concern with tyranny that runs through this text and man's inner freedom, freedom as a defining characteristic of man. So I don't. All right, now we're going to get into being a little more little c critical here. So where do I have it in here? Magi is a play on words. Magi, Magyaran, Magyars, but also Magi, Magi, which means magic, right? Where's the word where's the Finn word in here? It's got a J where there shouldn't be a J. So despite talking about the Finns, it describes the where is it? Here we go. The Frisians fight the Finns, right? Finnen is a slur for Orthodox pro-supernatural Protestants. This text is, remember I said it's theory fiction? It's a bunch of allegories. It's not quite a roman à clef, excuse me, which is a funny French word meaning novel with a key. Where is it in my notes? So a roman à clef is a literary genre where not based on a real story. Any comparison to real life is pure coincidence. It's a work of fiction. By the way, the author wrote a key, and if you get your hands on it, you can see who all these people are supposed to be. Modern examples are The Devil Wears Prada and House of Cards. Every character in there is a real-life person and commentary on them by the author. And if you have the key, you can find the real story. Like, this was a literary genre. People would make these novels, and then, like, the author would release the key after a few years of people playing with it. A question people have with this book is, okay, it's a hoax, it's a forgery, it's a fake, whatever. It's 190 pages in a fake alphabet. Why did they do that? People didn't have video games in 1850. There are a lot of books in Europe, starting in like the 1500s onwards, that exist as a game. It's a puzzle. You're supposed to have fun with it. You're supposed to toy with it. You're supposed to take it apart and then talk about it with your buddies. There are a lot of these little art project game puzzle books that come about. So in light of that, it's not necessarily odd that this thing exists, because things like this exist. They existed in Europe. This book is a big allegory for the, I'm going to butcher this word, Richtengestrede, which is a complex conflict between the Orthodox and modernist Protestants and the looming distant tyrannical figure of the Pope. Ooh, the Pope. Pope Dagon Fish Hat. So why do we think it's a real, why does anyone say, oh, this is a real thing? Because of that Atma guy. So now we're going to get into a little bit of unveiling. Sir, do you want me to do the word nerdery, or do you want me to get into like the actual kind of story first? Because I got a bunch of stuff on the word nerdery that I could go off on. If you want to do questions from the audience, we can.
Let me throw some stuff in there real quick, and yeah, then I think the story will be good to go over first, though, because the story is interesting. Like, just to be clear, if this book were like published and the guy was like, this is fiction, but it's almost historical kinda, and it's a novel, but it's openly fiction, and it was fun to write, it would make a great book. Or like,
revealed to me in a dream.
Sure. Like, yeah, it'd be a great for you younger guys out there, it'd be a great video game. Frankly, I would love to watch the sinking of Atland, and on a PS5 or whatever. But yeah, stuff I was gonna get into. So Ralda, their creator god, there's kennings used for him in there. One of them is Allfather, which anyone watching this is likely familiar with, right? And hence the connection to Freya or Frigg.
Which is interesting because the one monotheistic creator god is like a male. I mean, like, why would you call a mother goddess Allfather? But it's a matriarchy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's supposed to relate to the Vestal Virgins of Rome, is my understanding. And I mean, we had Githyer. Our folk have always had priestesses, not just priests. So whatever, I guess. Nothing against women or saying women couldn't do what these Berg maidens did in the Oera Linda book, but it doesn't make it any less fake. So with Ralda, his name means world, and so that kind of ties him to Freyr as well, because one of Freyr's kennings, my favorite of his, is Varaldagud, god of the world, and that may or may not be where they got the inspiration for the name Ralda. They may have just gotten it because it means world. And there's this the idea that Chris explained about Ralda created everything and is everything. There's also this bit in there, and I'm sure it's near the beginning, I can't remember exactly where, but it kind of says all good things come from Ralda. If it comes from Ralda, it is not good. It comes from mankind. Ralda can do no wrong, etc. Stuff you'd hear from Christians, right? What was the other thing? Well, I forgot the other thing I was going to say. You can go on. Oh, yeah. So some of the names they use for countries or places are like just a little off, like folk etymology level off from what they're actually called, and it's pretty fascinating, to be fair. The Atland one is interesting because they mean Atlantis, but it's also, there's some old record where like a Greek explorer maybe referred to Scandinavia or Sweden as Atland, and I'd have to do some more searching on that and pull it up. But yeah, so it's like it could refer to Atlantis or Sweden or whatever. But Sweden didn't sink, so they mean Atlantis, but it's fascinating because the Germanic people did come from Sweden. So, yeah.
And just regarding Atlantis real quick, Plato says it was beyond the Pillars of Hercules. So people typically posit today the usual positing of where it was supposed to be in Plato's imagination was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But the Pillars of Hercules today refers to the area where Spain and Algeria kind of touch each other. Algeria, Morocco, whatever, where Spain touches Africa. But it's also theorized the Pillars of Hercules also refers to a place farther in the Mediterranean on like the Libyan coast. So it's more likely that Plato thought this. But the other problem is that like Atlantis is supposed to be huge. Plato gives like a size estimate, and it's like a big. This is like Europe sized. It's like Australia, you know. So the North Europe, the North Atlantic thesis, where they're because they have to come. It has to be like in the North Sea between Britain and Scandinavia for them to make landfall in Frisia. You know, like. They're not going to sail from like Antarctica to Frisia. Like, so where is Atlantis supposed to be is an open question, which is kind of how this can be said. Like, now Plato isn't super clear where Atlantis was, right? So as I said, the basic story of this is that Cornelis over de Linde gets the book from his aunt. His aunt then gives it to Ilko Virwis, who then gives it to Johann Winkler. Winkler was, for a brief period of time, like, oh boy, this is such a cool thing. I can't wait to tell my bosses. And then he spends like a year reading it and comes to the conclusion that it's a crock of, you know, he gives it to his buddy, Jan Gerhardus Ottma, who 3 days later, Jan runs up to Johann in a manic fury after Johann is getting out of church, and he says, Johann, this is genius. We have to tell the world. And Johann says, my God, man, you read that in 3 days? Because like it took him a year to read this thing and like pick through it and come to the conclusion that it's book, right? Ottma was obsessed with this book. So the creation theory before we get into the publication of this book. So Johann Winkler spent a lot of time looking into who the heck made this. This is what I'm going to relay here is Goff Jensma relaying the genealogy of this is what I want to call the expanded Winkler theory, but I think there's enough evidence that you can just say this is just the truth, right? So the Oera Linda book is the product of 2 people and 1 man by proxy, maybe with a 4th guy involved, but he wasn't really involved in writing in much of the content directly. So there's 2 main players here. Cornelis over de Linden, who is the guy whose family owned the book. He's the owner. He was a man who dreamed of a great Frisian past. He had a lot of ideas. He wrote essays about them. Those essays show up in the Oera Linda book. They show up in a very polished form in the Oera Linda book. And there's bits of deuterocanonical lore in his essays. So like there's this name Abele, like the name Abele referring to Woden is in over de Linde's drafts. King Frank, King of the Franks, that's in de Linde's drafts, or over de Linde's drafts. Athens degenerating after Minerva leaves in the drafts. The assumption that Winkler made that Jensma then backs up is that over de Linde had a prior text given to him by someone. Over de Linde then took this text and rewrote it in the runes on the faked old paper. Partially that's backed up by the fact that in over de Linde's house after he died, people found more of this paper, more of this like blank faked old paper with the margins and where the page numbers were supposed to go and all that. So it's like he made too much paper and he just never got rid of it. To be fair, I don't think to be fair, as we will see in the story, he clearly didn't expect people to be digging through his house to find out the truth about this after he died, right? So over de Linde was a dreamer. He loved Frisia. He dreamed of a glorious Frisian past. He was also a theological modernist. To use modern parlance, theological modernism is the proper term for being a cocky pseudo-atheist if you're a Protestant. He wasn't a good writer. He was not a very strong writer. There's no shame in that. It's a weakness that afflicts some people, but he wasn't a strong writer, and the Oera Linda book isn't bad writing. We'll see about who is a strong writer later. One thing I said is he had this bizarre punctuation habit. He'd put commas and periods at the start of the next line, right? So it wouldn't be like sentence, 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 comma, next line. It'd be sentence, 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 next line, or sentence, 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 like line break, comma, next line. And he'd do that with periods. And this happens in both the Oera Linda book and in his normal writing. This bizarre, and to be fair, maybe he got it from the Oera Linda book. Maybe. The Oera Linda book has a lot of odd hyphenations, like in the middle of words, as if it's trying to do some kind of fanciful noun compounding, but sometimes it's just like of a regular word, like putting a hyphen in the middle of the word dictionary between the I and the O. Like that's not, what? Cornelis over to Linda did that in his normal writing. He bungled the CHT cluster in his normal writing. Coincidentally, that shows up in the Oera Linda book. Worst of all, his grandson snitched. His grandson said, yeah, my grandpa made this up because it made our family famous. And yeah. So there's another character we have to talk about, however. That man is Francois Haverschmidt, aka perhaps better known by his pen name Pete Paltians. So Francois Haverschmidt was a vicar and poet. A vicar means like intermediary of. The Pope is the vicar of God. He's the intermediary of God's will on earth. But in Protestantism, it just means like pastor, minister, priest. The guy who handles a parish is the vicar, right? So Haverschmidt was a modernist, big on science, big on rationality, reason, not big on doctrinaire, not big on dogma, priests, tyranny, centralization. Nah, not a big fan of any of that. He was also deeply into Frisian nationalism and Frisian prehistory. Frisian history starts relatively late because not many people were writing about the Netherlands circa 980. It's just a fact. You'll notice I said he had a pen name, more like an alter ego. Haverschmidt wrote a lot of satires and whimsical, allegorical fancies under the pen name Pete Paltians. Pete Paltians made multiple mytho-historical tales to convey theology. He had a bifurcated theology, Haverschmidt did. On the one hand, he was very focused on rationalism. Science is the tool by which we understand the will of God. He was also big on this idea of inner conscience. Conscience is really big amongst Protestants in the Germanic world because, simply put, conscience is what you call it when you think the Pope is completely wrong and a dummy. But the Pope, he's the Pope. The heir of St. Peter, he has the key, which at one time meant like a literal physical key that the Pope would theoretically use to open a gate to let your soul into heaven. You have to do what the Pope says. He has the key. I cannot. My conscience. Right? You see a lot about conscience in 20th, 19th century Germanic texts because it's a Protestant affect of how do you justify disagreeing with the Pope? Men have souls. My soul is telling me I have to disagree with the Pope, right? So Francois Haverschmidt was a student of, I want to get this guy's full name. Where is it? Jan Hendrik Scholten, and later of a man by the name of Huikas. I couldn't find Huikas's first name. It doesn't really matter. Scholten is where the rationalism comes from. Huikas is where the inner conscience comes from. Scholten almost drove Francois Haverschmidt to atheism, like real atheism. Huikas kept him in religion by through the monism. God is in everyone. God is where you get your soul from. God is where you get your conscience from. Haverschmidt was a modernist, a liberal, a progressive. He did a wedding ceremony where God has fatherly and motherly characteristics. That is absolutely verboten in the Orthodox, supernatural believing in Protestant church of his day. Yes, supernatural believing in. Francois Haverschmidt denied the existence of miracles in the supernatural. So the Winkler theory, aka the truth, is that Francois Haverschmidt wrote the initial Oera Linda book, the Oera Linda book, or rather the first half. Then Cornelis over de Linden took that manuscript and rewrote it in the Oera de Linda book script. And that would explain why there's so many errors in this, why it seems like he's haphazardly, he doesn't put F on every third person indicative present noun, right? No speaker of the language he is purporting would do that. No speaker of modern English would drop the S on a third person present singular indicative noun. They just wouldn't do it, right? Haverschmidt's theology, and through him Scholten's, is omnipresent throughout the text once you start looking for it. So in a lot of ways, the Oera Linda book's cosmology is a one-to-one of, like the theological cosmology is a one-to-one of Scholten and Haverschmidt's. The monotheistic creator God, the hyper-emphasis on rationalism, the extreme focus on freedom, inner conscience, the communism, the ancient Frisian past, right? Including, and this is an interesting tell, the 3,000-year freedom slavery cycles. The world goes through this cycle of like every 3,000 years we start at like the golden age of freedom, and then we fall into slavery and tyranny, and then we rise up and back to freedom. And I'm not doing a circle, but you get the idea. The contradiction of man's desire for tyranny and the nature of freedom is something that shows up in Scholten. The story of, there's this maiden named Troost who builds a shelter step by step, and it's a big allegory. It's a big allegory for, what do I have it as an allegory for? I got to get to it. Here we go. Building the shelter step by step is an allegory for man growing divine potential by creating element. By the shelter is freedom. The more freedom you have from tyranny, the closer you are to God. Get it? She's sheltered from the elements. She's sheltered from tyranny. Freedom, right? Haverschmidt made the initial Oera Linda then, and Cornelis over de Linden then translated it into, he antiquified it. So he takes this text to Ilko Virwijs, who is this bookish, bit of a spurg kind of a character who is, on the one hand, humoring over de Linden about getting this sent to the archives, which is a government office. Keep that in mind. He wasn't as critical of the text as he should have been. He kind of played a middleman. He probably would have gotten a bit of a financial compensation had this turned out to have been real and gotten absorbed by the public. Just saying. He doesn't appear to have been crazy or like malicious, but he did not do his due diligence as a scholar, particularly one who is supposed to do preliminary research on the authenticity of certain documents and include that in his reports. He didn't vouch for the authenticity of the book, but he didn't deny it when he saw problems. That's an important point. So Verwees sends it to Winkler. Winkler sends it to Otma. Otma is why Haverschmidt doesn't admit the ruse. So Jan Gerhardus Otma becomes a believer in 1870. Jensma calls him a convert because this becomes his religion. So when Otma comes out, he completely tarnishes his reputation. He was a very important scholar of his day, trashes his reputation. Some people thought he is such a dumb, words I'm not going to say and offend the Southerners that are listening, such a moron for this. How could he do this? They thought he had to be in on it. They thought he had to be trying to do this as like a scam to get money, because it's just, how can he believe this? But he believed it. He was a religious believer in, how did you pronounce the name, sir? Ralda? How are we pronouncing this?
Yeah, I've heard it pronounced Ralda, so I say Ralda.
Ralda, yeah, Ralda. He is a true believer in Ralda. A few other I'm not going to be mean to the person I want to. The person I want to compare him to is not listening to this program, but I'm not going to be mean and say it. But a few other evangelical, weak-willed conservatives followed suit. Ralda served as a way for them to have an out. They were too chicken to oppose modernism, but they didn't want to throw away religion. They didn't want to be atheists, but they also didn't want to say, like, no, really, guys, Yahweh will smite you if you disagree. And so Ralda served as an out. Atma was a true believer. He edited classical texts like Herodotus to bring them in line with the truth. Like, he got a copy of Herodotus and went through with a pen and corrected it, because the Oera Linda Book does not lie. This book for him was religious revelation. It was his Bible. He's the one that coined the term the Oera Linda Book. We call it that because of him, right? The Oera Linda Book. He produced a bad translation of the book to modern Dutch, translating it from the archaic, antiquified pseudo-Old Dutch. It was very bad. He smoothed over a lot of the puns and jokes that are in the book that you can see if you read it in like the original, because he's doing an extremely literalist, bordering on reinterpretation. He had an odd, non-analytical historiography. He treated the past as fact and not fiction. History is a series of stories we tell based on evidence. But for Atma, history was like, you can just go to Germany. You can just walk there and see the Lederhosen and the De Bratwurst and Die Frauen, right? As if like this, because remember, like let's just take off our skeptic hats for a minute here. This is a text claiming to be like ancestral wisdom passed down through the generations. It has gaps in it, right? Like the book on its own terms has to be accepted as an incomplete story because there's gaps in the narrative, right? Like the gap happens and then 10 years later, 100 years later, right? So Atma's public binary reframed the debate away from, this is a joke, this is a hoax, this is some kind of, there's something with this. It's not, to, this is a forgery and this is a hoax, to, this is a matter of, this is a lie, right? The middle position of, it's like a puzzle. You're supposed to solve the puzzle and see the thing inside, was just completely smoothed over because it was either truth or lies, as a scholarly matter, not a matter of literary interpretation. And again, he was a man of status and position in Dutch academic society, so he quadrupled down when people were like, bro, what are you doing? Wanpier, that's where the word vampire comes from. The Arabic calligraphy, remnants of Frisian script. Prehistoric telegraphs. The ancient Dutchmen had prehistoric telegraphs. and like apparently prehistoric firearms, given that they had laws prohibiting their usage, right? He would sign letters in the dating system based on like years since the fall of Atland. He had a copy of the book that he had on his nightstand that he would sleep next to. This was like a religious act. He would sleep next to the book. He twice recopied the book in the script, 1 page per day, as like a religious meditative act, which I'm not making fun of him for doing that, like as a thing. Like that's a super based idea. I've thought about doing that with like the Havamal, but like with the book, like, you know, he converted to this as his religion. He tried to make a dictionary of the fake language and grammar. He also created, I think the proper term is like pia fra'a, like pious frauds. Like he made fake older versions of things to defend the book. And he also circulated false accusations. Like there was I didn't write down the guy's name because it's a who cares thing, but a famous classicist died, right? And then he circulated false accusations from like anonymous skeptics that was the guy who wrote it. Because look at how dumb the opposition is. They think this nonsense, you can clearly see this guy didn't write it because he wasn't in the country at the time, you know, like that kind of a thing. Like making up nonsense to smear the opposition. He quintupled down on the authenticity of this. So why didn't Haverschmidt come out? Haverschmidt was a number of things. The victim of a catastrophic PR failure on this part. This book was now, when Atma got involved, this book became an international and national controversy. This was a big deal in the Netherlands. It was the subject of academic debate. It was the subject of a religious scandal. Like, the Protestants are arguing about whether or not God zaps people with lightning, and all of a sudden there's like matriarchal communistic neo-pagans. As like, that's like something they have to think about now. Like, this was like a big deal. It was also a nationalist thing. I don't mean to be mean to the Dutch, but why isn't the Netherlands part of Germany? Like, no, really. Like, if you look at Dutch, it's about as far from Hochdeutsch as Bavarian is, give or take. I'm not you know what I mean here. It's like all of the little dialects of German, Dutch could be one of them in another timeline. Why isn't it? The Dutch identity as a distinct ethno-nationalist phenomena is relatively young, and the Dutch were very defensive of their sovereignty from, you know, papal rule, from Germany, from England, from Spain, from the Pope. And so this, like, guys, everyone descends from the Dutch was a big deal for an ethnos that was still relatively young and still undecided in a lot of what does it mean to be Dutch? Does it mean being a matriarchal communist? It could be, you know, the question wasn't resolved. And of course the government was involved. Remember how I said archivist? Remember how I compared it to the Register of Deeds? You know what it is if you go to the Register of Deeds and you make a deed that someone didn't sign? It's fraud. That's a crime. You get in a lot of trouble. But we're Americans, so we only care about money. In the Netherlands, you know what it is if you bring a faked ancient document, or at the time, I don't know if they still do this, but you know what it is if you bring a faked ancient document to the local archivist? It's fraud. You get in trouble. You go to whatever their equivalent of prison is at this time. It's probably like a workhouse where you like have to turn a crank to work a pump that like keeps the levee from flooding or something, right? You have, at minimum, you have to pay a lot of money, and you're never allowed near a college again or a church. Because remember, Francois Haverschmidt, yeah, he's a liberal. Yeah, he's a cuck on the issue of miracles. He's a priest. That is his job. He went to seminary. He makes a living because every day little Dutch grannies put their Netherland marks, their whatever the money is called over there, in the till, right? If this guy gets caught writing matriarchal neo-pagan communist fan fiction, or worse, actual pagan theology, he not only loses his job, he gets labeled a heretic. the Netherlands was only a short period away from that resulting in him dying, like getting thrown in a metal cage and burnt to death for like, no one wants this to happen. Like the Oera Linda Book, no one in the Netherlands wanted this. So when it happens, it's a big deal. Unfortunately, Atma quadruples down, and Over de Linden also does too, because now he's a celebrity, because now he's the scion of this ancient lineage. Kings. He was kings. They was kings. Literally, Over de Linden's bloodline is like, Cornelis Over de Linden, this book claims, is descended from an ancient lineage of like scribal priest kings keeping secret knowledge given to man by God. Like, he's basically a minor prophet, if not a major prophet. Go on, sir.
How dare you call Over de Linden's ancestors priests? All right, that's like a big insult to them.
Yeah.
This odd well, not odd for the time, I guess, but the issue with priest, I think, like, it might be the opening line of the Oera Linda Book is like, Aki, my son, never let the eyes of a priest or a monk go over these writings or some such.
Yeah.
And there's this anti-Catholic thing in there because Catholicism is what's called high church. A great example our listeners will be familiar with, the AFA is high church. We have an Allsherjargoði, we have the Witan, the Gothar, we have Folkbuilders, we have a structured hierarchy, we have centralization, and autocracy, etc. That's what the Catholic Church was. I guess it still is, kind of.
I think it still is the touchstone in Christianity. There's no one higher church these days.
Yeah. Well, so that's kind of what they're going for with the Frians or Frians, Frisians, however you want to pronounce it, sort of rebelling and stepping away from the the priests, the magi, magyars, whatever they call them in the Oera Linda Book.
So real quick here, just to kind of go back, I sort of touched on this, and now we can actually say the bit. So the magi, magi is magic in Dutch. So miracles, the supernatural, it's magic, right? These are the magicians. They literally like trick people with magic. The Frisians, the Frians, the free folk, they use weapons of iron. But the devilish Magian people, those Asiatics, the yellow ones, they use weapons of gold. They're weak, but deceptively pretty. Magic, right? So the Frisians fight the Finns, aka the Finnen. That's a slur that the more secular Protestants would use for the pro-supernatural Orthodox Protestants. So you can kind of think like Silicon Valley, very liberal Jews looking at like Hasids, like Haredim in New York, right? Like there is a split here, and it's not like they dressed differently, right? This is a cultural, religious separation that's going on. And it is kind of like a fight for like, what does the Dutch ethnos look like? If you were an alien and you came down and you looked at Mark Zuckerberg and like, the Rebbe, like the Moses Mordecai Mendel Schneerson in New York, you would not be. It wouldn't be a wrong idea to think that these are two different ethnic groups, because they kind of are, right? So the Magi have like the Finns as their minions. What they do is they conquer the Hungarians, the Magyars, and then they conquer the Finns. So the Pope conquers the Asiatic hordes and uses them to enlist the minionship of the Orthodox Protestants against the free-thinking liberal Protestants. Right? The free people against the magic believers and the superstitious bumpkins. You see what I mean? Like this is a pun, right? Atma's literalist translation, however, like if you translate the the free people to the Frisians. Academics think that like Frisians actually comes from like the frizzy ones because they'd like spike their hair up in a Celtic fashion. I don't know. It's more sensible than the free folk if you look at other tribal names of Germanic peoples, like the sword people, the spear people, the ones who pour out, you know, the strong guys, right? Like
that's
it wouldn't surprise. Go on.
That's something that gets on my nerves with the Oera Linda book too, is it uses a lot of folk etymology, and people back then did do that, but that doesn't make folk etymology correct.
Right. Another comparison to Plato. Plato does a lot of like, yes, Tartarus. It sounds like Tartarus, which is a word for misty. It's the misty place, which is forgivable if you like live in ancient Greece and going to the next city state over is hard. But you know, like we'll get into the words in a minute. We'll get into the words. But like just to go back to what I was saying real quick, the free people, they're fighting the magic users and the tyrannical priesthood who enlists the help of the superstitious ones. That is completely glossed over if you just say the Frisians fight the Finns and the Magyars who are working for. I mean, when I hear magi, I think of like Persian priests, like Zoroastrian clergymen, because I'm a bit of a nerd. But like, if you bring up the magi to the average American, they'll think like, oh yeah, those 3 dudes that brought Jesus a bunch of smelly stuff and gold, which they're Zoroastrian priests. Like, they're not wrong for thinking that. They just don't get the full picture of it. So Oera Linda takes this and just runs with it. And he is writing with Atma and enhancing the story and making the situation worse. I don't mean. So let's talk about Francois Haberschmidt's inner life. He was a man who suffered from depression his entire life. He was always moody. He was always emotionally unstable. He was prone to incredible self-doubt. He always felt socially inadequate. He was very prone to guilt. He killed himself in 1894. I don't know if it was because of this, but I imagine he felt. He's a man who feels guilty easily. He perpetrated a hoax, put 2 and 2 together. I'm not saying he killed himself because of the Oera Linda book, but you know, this could not have helped his mental state. He's already squeaking by a very dubious and dangerous religious and ethnic conflict. And then, oh, by the way, the neo-pagan fanfic you wrote, it's in the news, right? If he came out and admitted it when Atma went public and became like a convert and Oera Linda was quadrupling down, he would go to jail. He would suffer legal consequences for having written the draft that Oera Linda then antiquified. Do you want to talk about something, sir, while I go through my notes here to see if there's anything more I should say before we get into the like the words, just kind of like.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off. The Allsherjargoði always says on here, truth is one of our virtues. There is some anti-Catholic stuff in here, and there's some anti-Jewish stuff in here. And, you know, fair enough. But it's, I got to think about how it words it in the book. It's something about like there were Frisians that sailed east or some such, and their language changed, and they became bronze-skinned and curly-haired and enjoyed putting rings of gold in their ears, and then they came back and started spreading their false faith among our folk, which is like 4 layers of irony a little bit if you think about it, because Christianity is exactly what they just described. Also, there's parts where they refer to Finda's folk, which, as we mentioned, is Asians. I think it also, when they're talking about Jews, they say Finda's folk. I could be wrong on that, though.
So let's real quick run down the. I don't mean to be mean to the Dutch. I feel bad saying that for like the 5th time, but
they'll be all right.
Why isn't the Netherlands the capital of the world? right? So here's
Freedom.
freedom of freedom. So why does this utopian society fail? Magian corruption causes cracks and fissures to form, and the rise of tyranny and patriarchy. So patriarchy, inheritance, the men start getting uppity and hysterical, and local rulers import foreign customs to centralize power. They disobey the texts, they disobey Freya's values. So there is actually an over male figure. It is Friso, who is the
First
you know
of the
how
Frisians from India.
you
or
know
something.
how is it Abraham Avraham gets renamed to Yisrael when he makes the covenant with Yahweh. So like all of his descendants are Yisrael because they are the descendants of the guy named Yisrael, the house of Yisrael, right? So the Frisians are like that with Friso, who is, whereas Freya is the feminine prophetess saint of this society, Friso is the male counterpart in as much as he's like, you, the reader, are supposed to look at Friso and be like, value, virtue, freedom, right? He's the guy you're supposed to emulate because you can't emulate Freya. They disobey the text and they disobey Friso's values, right? This is a parable about Christianity because you were saying, sir, like Christians went to Africa and like bullied and harassed Africans into taking up Christianity. It's not like the Dutch weren't aware of that. The Netherlands had a colonial empire. There were people who were critical of this. And I mean, it's hard to talk about like my inner conscience. I must disobey the Pope and then turn around and be like, oh, hey, but you guys over there, you gotta obey me. I don't have to obey the Pope, but you gotta obey me. There were Netherlands Dutchmen who were opposed to the colonial imposition of Christianity upon African colonial and imperial subjects, and this is really it's really critical of the imposition of Christianity upon people, and like how it's a Christian priest saying that Christianity spread through subversion, the importation of foreign customs, and helping people centralize power when they shouldn't have. Is that a criticism of African colonialism, or is it a criticism of Constantine, Clovis, and Tryggvason? I mean, yes. Like, it's, I don't know what to tell you. So should we do some questions, or do you want me to go on to the word nerding? Because after the word nerding, I want to go into where does this go after Atma?
Yeah, let's do some questions. Real quick, Folkbuilder Ron Boardman bought us 5 coffees, $25. I don't know why they can't just call it that, but that's all right. That's some awesome clip art.
I think it's my finest work. It's my finest work.
Austin asks, a little bit after the Loyal Saxons episode, but why do you think the Anglo-Saxons were so vulnerable during the Viking Age? Why were the Danes able to be so successful? So, being 90-something% English, that's a fun subject for me. The Anglo-Saxons were so vulnerable during the Viking Age because, like our modern Anglo-Saxon leadership here in America or in Britain or anywhere in the Anglosphere, there was kind of a certain amount of like stratification, might be the right word, between the nobility and royalty of the Saxons and the peasantry. And well, there's 2 issues. There's that, and where the leaders had become so kind of detached from the idea of actually caring for their people. So being a leader is supposed to be an oath, right? Your people let you lead and you protect them, essentially. And the Anglo-Saxons knew this. Well, at first anyway. the Asatru ones did, and the first couple generations of the Christian ones did. But by the time of the Viking Age, that had kind of changed, and we start seeing something more similar to high medieval ages kingship, in that leaders just weren't looking out for their people, essentially, in most cases. And so if the Vikings were able to take over a few villages and raid a few different places before the local aldermen or thane or whatever started to care, well, then the Vikings had already made that much progress. The other issue is just kind of a logistics one. England had, not unified, of course. They had just gotten to the point where they were all agreeing that they were English, essentially, but they still weren't one kingdom of England. They had, at this point, it was essentially Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, East Anglia. And so the very, very first attack by Viking raiders is not at Lindisfarne, like many people claim, but it was in Portland in, I think, Mercia. Anyway, so the Anglo-Saxons had traded with Danes before. They were cousin people. They knew the Danes. They could speak to the Danes. The language was mutually intelligible. It's kind of like meeting someone from the other side of the United States, right? And so a Danish ship comes by.
Real quick, just to say, Jackson Crawford and Simon Roper, I believe that's his name. Jackson Crawford is an academic who studies the Old Norse language. Technically, he's a scholar of medieval Scandinavian literature. Simon Roper is, I don't believe he's a doctor, but I'm pretty certain he's some kind of academic. He studies Old English. And both of them are able to communicate in these languages. I mean, roughly, but they can speak them from their head. And they did a thing where they met, I don't know if they met up or if they did it digitally, but they had a conversation in their languages. And once they got the point of put the Greg's pasty in the boot so we can take the lift, meant, then it was like, oh yeah, they're speaking this language with an accent.
Right.
They literally thought of themselves as one ethnos until relatively recently, when the Vikings show up and start Vikinging.
Yeah, and even then, the big difference wasn't these are crazy random foreigners. It was, oh, hey, these are our pagan cousins from the homeland. I thought they would have converted by now. They didn't. But yeah, so the first Vikings, I guess, to arrive in England, they show up in Portland, and the Mercians, I'm pretty sure it was Mercians, they think it's just another merchant ship of Danes, which is a very, very common sight to them. Just sail across the North Sea real quick, swap goods, whatever. And instead, the Viking stabs the Mercian guy, come and check him out, and they kind of raid and they leave. And then it's fine for a few years, but that is kind of what causes that avalanche. Essentially, there wasn't the militaristic infrastructure or standard operating procedures in place for how to deal with these things. A lot of that didn't really come together until Alfred the Great's time, establishing burhs, which is one of the things they talk about in the Oera Linda book, but it's a fortress. Where the modern German word burg is, fortress. So, yeah, it was a logistics thing, and then it was just the leaders were too worried about hunting foxes or whatever in the great forest, rather than worrying about their peasantry, as long as their taxes were collected on time and such.
So
relatable.
Another thing, if you look up, in 865, a group of Vikings under Halfdan Ragnarsson, Ivar the Boneless, Guthrum the Old, a few others, set sail for England. And then they arrive in what is referred to as a great heathen army. Great means big. A big army of pagans comes in from Scandinavia. They are romping around England from 865 to 878. That's 13 years that they're in England, not repeated harrying of the coast. No, they land, march into England, and just keep marching around for 13 years.
right? The structure of feudalism, the way it had happened, in part due to the centralization of power, ironically, and ironic enough for the topic, but the tyranny that the church had helped impose, was that, you know how feudalism is the king has the dukes, the dukes have their counts, the counts have their barons, the barons have the peasants, right? And each one says, all right, I need a guy from your household, right? That takes a really long time to assemble. So when the great heathen army shows up, they're just a micro state in a state of total war. From the moment they land their boats and decide to start stabbing people, every man in the great heathen army is committed to the cause, because the alternative is dying. You know, they don't really have a home to go back to as long as they're in England. They have to get back in a boat and sail back to Denmark or Norway. They don't have to be like, oh, I wonder how the crops are doing, or, oh, well, I want to go fight, but, you know, my lord, he's just, I'm not a fan of him. I hope someone stabs him. They can't do that because they are in England, right? The Vikings were able to levy political speed a lot better than the Anglo-Saxons were. There's also stuff about like the boats. They could like strike from rivers more easily. Like in the time it takes to assemble a cavalry army, a bunch of Scandies could raid a monastery, throw the treasure on the boat, and be like out of the area. You can't put the horses on a boat. I mean, you can, but not like that efficiently, right? I don't really know enough to say about this like conclusively, but I have seen academics talk about the settlement changes that start happening when Christianity comes in. Like, why are there monasteries so close to the shore if you know that Vikings are going to come and steal all your precious stuff? Right? Like, medieval Scandinavians tended not to put important things next to the water. They would have like a little dock town, and then they'd have a kind of centralized walkway going up to the actual agricultural village. This is generalizations, right? And I've seen academics positing that the change away from that, we don't want to be too close to the water mindset, starts to go away. I wouldn't necessarily blame it on Christianity as like a religion, like Jesus makes you live near rivers or something, but as the feudal structure, as peasants become tools to extract wealth from the land for the lords, becomes the idea, rather than like free men on the land cooperating to survive. As that mindset shifts, then it becomes easier for these wild men to prey upon them. Like, why did you make it, you know, from like the Viking perspective, it's like, why did you make it so easy for us to steal all your gold crosses if they mattered so much? Where are the guards? And to be fair to the Christians, maybe not everyone wants to live in a society where pirates could come around and just steal your fancy gold things, because we're told that Anglo-Saxon, Scandinavian, Germanic holy sites had guards. Like, what I would compare it to today is a Tyler in Freemasonry, like a guy who is tasked with protecting the entrance to keep outsiders from coming in, but also like what we would now call like a hop steward, someone whose job it is to keep the holy site maintained, but also like beat up people who want to show up and steal the shiny things, right? So like the transition towards like a different model of what law and order means, the clash there does not favor the people who don't have armed guards outside of their holy sites. You feel me? Which again, I mean, I don't want us to have armed guards at our holy sites, or else. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the monks were totally wrong here in that regard, but it is a difference in mindset that might not be immediately apparent.
One other thing, just kind of tangentially related, but it's a cool story. And it's this kind of moral of the story is part of what got my wife into Asatru a little bit, is so the part, why were the Danes able to be so successful? All the things we said, and then again, kind of tangentially, I guess. So after Alfred the Great's army defeated Guthrum, I want to say it was the Battle of Eddington, and then the Treaty of Wedmore, I think that's it, was established. And the Guthrum's army, his leaders had to swear on Christian holy relics that they would not attack again. But the Havamal says, give your enemies no peace. You know, you don't have to honor oaths with enemies, right? And so Guthrum, or whoever it was, I'm pretty sure it was Guthrum though, he was like, oh yeah, sure, dude, I'll swear on this gold stick with a dead Jewish guy on it for sure, man. Definitely I will not come attack you again. And then afterwards, you know, Alfred and the Saxons leave, and he's like, all right, well, let's start planning the next attack, because they're enemies. Why would they honor an oath with their enemies? So yeah, I always thought that was a cool story, and it kind of relates back to teachings from the Havamal.
When the great heathen army makes landfall, the king in whose territory they land goes to them and says, I'll give you a bunch of horses if you leave. And so they take the horses and go to the next kingdom over. Like, and they eventually come back and kill him because he's, you know, so just to say real quickly here, I looked at the comments and I just want to say, this isn't quite a question, but I want to address it. Langolier, early in Asatru's reforging, I don't know if the Odinic Rite did this or the Asatru Alliance, but there was the runic year, which is just AD plus 250. We don't need to get too deep into era years for Asatru. That's something I can spurg out on for too long, and we already have to talk about a bunch of words in this book. So let's go to the next question.
Yeah, it's probably for the best.
We will have an era year later, sir. Don't worry.
Yeah. Let's see. So this question is labeled as Austin, but it comes from Caleb. It's kind of multiple questions, but it can be answered in one long form answer, I suppose. Are there any tips or information or resources for people trying to make the trip to Freyshof? How many people are currently signed up to come to the dedication? Will there be another event like the Freyshof dedication? When was the last time there was a dedicated temple to Freyr? I'm going to kind of work backwards. When was the last time there was a dedicated temple to Freyr? At least 1,000 years ago. Will there be another event like the Freyshof dedication? Yes, every time we dedicate a Hof. They'll all be like a little different. So inside baseball, kind of, I guess. Witan Eriksson, as he'll be the Hofgothi for Freyshof, he's gotten to decide on a lot of the little details, I suppose. So it's not going to be, you know, like a shot-for-shot redo of what the Njordshof dedication was like, which was not a shot-for-shot redo of what the Thorshof dedication was like, etc. But yeah, we're gonna have more dedications. How many people are currently signed up to come to the dedication? Let's see. Nick's been keeping a counter for us here. Let me scroll down. 106 so far, which is incredible. That's, I think, almost twice as many people came to Njordshof's Charming the Plow this year. So that's awesome. It's going to be really crowded, but really fun. Okay.
The building will fit them. The building will fit them. Don't worry.
Sure it will. We'll see. Are there any tips or information, resources for people trying to make the trip to Freyshof? I will let our Freyshof Folkbuilder here answer that.
So if you go on to Google Maps and put in Freyshof, it will show you exactly where Freyshof, fifth Hof of the Asatru Folk Assembly, is. It's a lovely little, I don't know if you guys, if where you're at, sir, you have a better term for this. I've always wanted to call it like sub-rural. It's like a suburb, but in the country kind of. It is nearby two freeway exits, like 15 minutes from hotels either direction. Get a hotel west of the Hof. They're just better quality. But you would ideally you would drive or carpool to Youngstown or Austintown, and it's going to be on a 12-6. That's It's a Saturday, right? It's going to be on a Saturday. But if you get there on Friday, you know, people are going to be in the hotels Friday. I don't want to say anything, but you know, people will be there, right? You would arrive Saturday. I'm certain there will be people who would volunteer to ferry people around. Get in contact with your folk builder or any folk builder. Email me at csavich@runestone.org, and I can try to, you know, accommodate somehow if you need some, like, any member, anyone in leadership will pass you along, right? I don't know if we've talked about like carpooling yet, but like it's a 15-minute drive on the freeway at most.
Yeah,
20 minutes on the back roads.
It's one of those things. We're not gonna like sit down and plan it out, but like at the last minute, if you're like, "Hey, so and so, can I get a ride to the Hoff?" If they have room in their vehicle, it's a pretty much 100% chance they're gonna say yes. You know,
the missus and I are gonna cart Lucy in her baby car seat, but we will have 2 seats in our car if you don't mind being in the car with the squealer. So,
well, also know once you RSVP, Witan Erickson sends out an email with like hotel addresses and all the tips and tricks and such too.
yeah.
So the big thing is if you're going RSVP, we'll get you
Yes.
the information.
RSVP sooner rather than later. The date is approaching, and if you need accommodation, I don't mean that pejoratively, but like if you're going to need accommodation, let us know in advance. I want to just say about when was the last time there was a dedicated temple to Freyr. I don't know if it counts as dedicated, but there was supposed to be a statue of him in the temple at Uppsala in Sweden. King Blotswain was murdered in 1087, and the temple was burnt down shortly thereafter. So probably 1100-ish, I want to say. That's under 1,000 years technically, but like it's so close. It's like, oh wow, you know.
well, 1,000 years sounds way cooler than 900 and whatever years.
87. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
Don't kill the cool factor. Let's see. Tyler says, "Hey there, question for the show tonight. How has being Asatru impacted your role in your families, be they as sons, parents, husbands, siblings, etc.? Do you find that being Asatru inspires you to do things in your familial relationships that you may not otherwise do? Thanks." You can start that one, Chris.
Yes and no, I think. I think it gives my familial life and relationships structure. What does it mean to be a father? What does it, from my perspective, like what does it mean for my wife to be a mother? How are we supposed to interact with our children, with extended family members? In a certain sense, what do we owe them? What do we owe the ancestors? What do we owe our descendants? I saw in Asatru a lot of what I, in my soul, wanted but couldn't necessarily put into words or formal structure. When I started looking into this, it was coming home and finding words to describe what I knew was home. So I don't think I would be a radically different father if I wasn't Asatru. I think being Asatru has definitely made me more concerned with living virtuously. Not like I don't think I was a particularly viceful man before I would officially declare myself Asatru. I worship Thor and Odin and Freya, you know, but focused on the formal and orderly and open practice of the 9 noble virtues of being a just man. I think it definitely inspires me too. Not like I would not be just to my children, but it makes me more aware of it and of like what I need to do. You know, I have to be all of these 9 virtues to my family, particularly to my nuclear family, particularly to my extended family, so on and so forth. I feel kind of bad because I don't have a fun, like Christian style, like I was a sinner before I came home kind of a story. But
Right.
I think the conscious ordering is important, you know.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I've always been a goody two shoes, kind of a nerd. I didn't really. Yeah, I don't have a story about like, oh, I hit rock bottom, but then Asatru saved me. Asatru has definitely made me better, and it's definitely the right thing to be doing. Obviously, but I can think of. Let me kind of look at the question, make sure I answer it correctly again. Yeah, so do I find it inspires me to do things that I wouldn't otherwise do? Yeah, kind of. When I was a Christian and when I was an atheist, there's sort of this idea in Christianity, and you've all heard it if you're listening to this, the kind of thing that Jesus says he'll turn brother against brother, father against son, whatever. And so there's kind of this mindset, and it's not too prevalent here in the South because we're so family oriented, or at least we used to be. But, this idea of like, well, I have God, and if my family doesn't accept me or God, then they're no family of mine, right? And as an atheist too, you have like that kind of cringe, libtard, whatever mindset of like cutting out toxic people or some such. Like leftists are always willing to just like completely disown somebody because they called them their birth name instead of their new made up Tumblr name or whatever. Not that I was ever that kind of atheist, but you get the idea. And so now, for example, as an example, I always try to. So I'm the oldest of my siblings, and so if there's ever conflict with my siblings or their spouses or whatever, and there's not usually, thankfully, but sometimes it happens, and I always have to be the one to fix it, and I take a certain pride in that, and I can't find a way to directly relate it to Asatru, but it's like if I know I'm going to have to like confront my sister and my brother because they're arguing about something stupid, and I have to fix, in my head, I go, this is the noble thing to do. This is the Aryan thing to do. This is the Asatru thing to do. And I'm going to do it because I'm Asatru. So I don't have a cool answer for it. But yeah, there's that.
As far as religion, sometimes people say like, this is kind of a ramble, but I promise it's related to this question here. Sometimes people like critique us or just anyone in general about like, oh, well, your religion, your ideology is illegitimate because it just involves doing things you want to do. It doesn't involve doing things that are hard. And I think something that we have to do for religion that is hard is try to stick by and guide and maintain family when it might honestly just be easier to cut out a toxic person. I'm not a Gothi, so I don't get to like opine on this officially, but I mean, I think even within Asatru, there's a limit where it's like, yeah, no, you are too toxic. I'm not trying to save this part of the family, but like our limit for too toxic is a little farther out than perhaps some other people's might. And, you got to put on the hazmat suit and go fix the problem. That can be hard when you don't want to do it. Because everyone talks about family as it's this thing that matters, but then like we have to do it. It's the thing we have to do, even if it isn't fun, I'm done.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, we don't have like some official position on that in the Trulamau or anything, but like, yeah, that's correct. We should be, it's this interesting balance of we have to, be willing to give our folks some grace, for lack of a less Christian sounding word, but also there are times when you have to kind of prioritize people and say, no, you're not going to do this in front of my kid or whatever. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I thankfully don't have any transvestite relatives, but if one wanted to come meet my son, I'm going to go tell him to pound sand, and I'm going to call him by his birth name when I do so, just for a little added punch, because I'm a jerk, for example. I want to try and answer this question better than I have. Let me look at it again. The only other way I could think of Asatru impacting my role in my family is, like, I guess in regards to how I have planned for my son's life so far. So before he was born, I think it was like at the baby shower, I kind of told everybody, like, hey, no gender, liberal, whatever, ideology, anything around my son ever. I mean it. No Christianity, anything around my son ever. I mean it. He lives in the South. He's going to hear it. The furthest out of this part of the South we ever plan on living is Sigerham, which is in Tennessee, the South. He'll get plenty of Christianity. Don't add on to it. It's not happening. I mean it. You know, try me, right? Other than that, maybe I've just been Asatru now long enough where I don't remember how I can't like theorize on how I would have acted without it. So sorry for the kind of lame answer.
So I saw in the chat Gothi Rob Stam. I assume that's Gothi Rob Stam and not another Rob Stam, but moving on, pointing out that this Oera Linda Book stuff disagrees with a general westward movement of the Proto-Indo-European peoples.
Mm-hmm.
For a brief recap, actual normal person brief, not me brief. White people come from three populations: Neolithic hunter-gatherers who come up from Africa, the Anatolian farmers who come up from Anatolia, which today is Turkey, and then the Proto-Indo-Europeans, aka the steppe herders, who, I mean, they experience their ethnogenesis in the Ukraine, so technically they start in Europe, but there's been enough work done to trace their movement from further east westward, right? There's this movement into Europe from outside of it. That's how white people come about. We see an archaeological, in addition to genetic, flow westward, with the exception of the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European family and the Tocharians, and the Anatolian, Tocharian, and Indo-Iranic branches move out of Europe, eastward, southward, but everyone else moves west. There's a westward movement into Europe, which is exactly the opposite of what the Oera Linda Book is positing, which is an eastward movement out of Frisia. And ironically, the patriarchal inheritance having, priest having out of Asia guys are the bad guys. So I'm a word nerd. My instinct when I hear about this text is, what do the words say? So how does the language, like the content of the language of the Oera Linda Book look? Because if this is a genuinely old text, we should see some pretty interesting things. For example, the word, the singular of Aesir, os, or os, sorry, the vowel's got to be long, is cognate with the Old English os and the Gothic uns. And in Old English and Old Norse, this word means God, just means the Aesir, the tribe of the deities. But in Gothic, we're told that it refers to ancestors. Now, this term is cognate with the Sanskrit asura, which at the latest date refers to the, I'm just going to say gods of chaos because it's easy and we don't need to talk about Hinduism too much. But before that, it refers also to the devas, the gods of order. And before that, it just means lords in general. It means lords in general in the earliest strata of Avestan, the old language of Iran. And then in a later strata of Avestan, it refers to the deities of Zoroastrian, like Ahura Mazda. It means Lord Wise. Ahura Mazda means Lord, literally means Lord Wise, the wise Lord. Interestingly, this term is also cognate with the Hittite is what everyone calls them, but they're different than the people who are called the Hittites in the Bible. They should be called the Neshens because that's what they called themselves, whatever. The Hittite emperor was the Hashu, and his wife was the Hashuana. This word is cognate with Isir, and it just refers to the emperor. He's obviously not a deity, right? So we should expect to see some pretty interesting stuff in this book, right? We do. So the Oera Linda book uses the word, it's pronounced, I'm just going to wing it, merktie, means market. Comes from the Latin word meaning, comes from the Latin market, which comes from an Etruscan word, which is something like merx. Etruscan is not an Indo-European language. Why is there, but more importantly, why is there an Etruscan word in an ancient Frisian text handed down by detailed copyist devotees, and preserving this directly and correctly is like the point of this family's religion, right? Now, scholars at the time didn't know crap about Etruscan. We still know relatively little about it because we don't have a Rosetta Stone. We can pronounce, we have a lot of Etruscan relatively. We have a good amount of Etruscan texts. We know these words. We don't know what they mean because they're never defined in a language that we know. For comparison, the Rosetta Stone is this big block that has a text in Greek, Latin, and Egyptian on it. Up until that point, Egyptian was completely unknown to the Western world because we just didn't know what the hieroglyphics meant. So Etruscan wasn't actually really understood by Westerners until after World War I, World War II, really. Like, Hitler is dead for like a decade before anyone is like confident in what things in Etruscan mean. This is a very young science, right? So the creator of the Oera Linda book would be completely unaware of the fact that market is not a Latin word, let alone maybe even a Germanic one, honestly. At one point, the Frisians send out people to the Himalayas, as they call it in that one Ramayana anime my wife and I watched. Actually, pretty fun little movie. I digress. Himalayas comes from Sanskrit, and it very clearly comes from Sanskrit. You know what the modern English equivalent of Himalayas would be? I want to make sure the modern English equivalent of Himalaya in English would be rhyme slime. If you look at the cognates of what it means, because it means like the deposited house or something like that, right? Himalayas is only possible if it's a loan word from Sanskrit. This word could not come from Frisian, right? Another example is chronic scriver, which clearly means chronicle scribe, in addition to chronicle coming from Latin, and I'm pretty sure that comes from Greek. I didn't actually look that one up. Dutch schrijver is from the Latin scribare. It's a Latin word. Chronic scriver, this is like a profession in ancient Frisian society, right? Then there's modern terms. There's modern is 1850s in the Netherlands, right? There's modern terms. What do the Volksmoeders retire to when they are sleepy? A bedroom. The phrase "the beginning of the end" shows up. That's actually something that Talleyrand coined. So this text cannot predate the Napoleonic period because no one said that before that as like a set phrase. It talks about lung disease in cattle using a number of stock phrases that come from an outbreak of cow lung disease in the Netherlands, right? Like stock phrases that were in newspapers and the like. There's a lot of consternation about lake dwellings in Switzerland. These are stilt houses. What's the Cranog is the term for these. It's basically a house on stilts sitting over a lake. Those show up in Switzerland. because that was in the newspapers at the time, right? There's a word here, motherlik, motherlike. It literally means mother-like, but it means motherly. The attributes of what it means to be motherly are specific to the 1800s. Gensma doesn't really elaborate on what that means too much, but like the depictions of what mothers are supposed to be are oddly modern, right? I already talked about the Finns. Finn means pure, the pure ones, right? That is also a modern term. Magi equals Maggie equals magic. I already talked about that. Magic is a fun one. Magic comes to English through French, but from like Greek, referring to the Magi, the Zoroastrian priests. It actually means, it's cognate with magos, magos comes from Avestan. It's cognate with Greek mega, with Latin magnum, with English mighty, right? They're the mighty ones because they had knowledge and wisdom and stuff, right? And the Greeks had a very low opinion of the Zoroastrian priesthood because go watch 300. Zoroastrian imperialism tried to conquer Greece. I mean, yeah. And so they looked very poorly on Zoroastrian intellectualism, Zoroastrian religion. And so that term, like the teachings of the Magi, came to be known as, on the one hand, as like foreign intellectualism, but also like basically heresy. Like there's attestations of both Greeks and Scythians of like a politician in these places getting a little too Zoroastrian for his constituents' tastes, so they murder him. They just kill him, and it's like, well, bro, he was a Zoroastrian. And then everyone's like, oh, well, if that's the case, oh, you were justified. So magic is a specific term that actually derives from a very specific location that doesn't really make sense in this cosmology to show up. It does make sense if it's this pun, however. What else? There's Demet, as used for the people. Demet, demos, from the Greek word for people. There's a lot of Protestant terms regarding morality and decency that show up, and the sheer number of them is more interesting than any specific one, because like every society has morality and decency, right? But very Protestant concerns, very Protestant vocabulary. For a text about an ancient society, this ancient society seems to agree a whole lot with these Dutch liberal Protestant views. There's a lot of 19th century Dutch terms for government, municipal stuff, economics. The government of the ancient Frisian state is very, very similar to what a Dutch citizen in the 19th century would expect from his state and how it's structured, despite ostensibly being this top-down, given to them by God kind of state. So as an example, there's a term that shows up, standrecht. Recht? Standrecht. This means to stand before the law. This is actually a medieval concept by which a man would go to court and would stand in front of the king and say, my lord, my neighbor, he hath stealeth from me a cow. And he would have to like plead his case for the king to get involved, to stand before the court, to stand before the king. That's not how this stuff worked in like the Bronze Age, which, to be fair, the Oera Linda Book is positing a society that exists before the Bronze Age, but it's odd that there's a lot of these terms that are reliant upon medieval jurisprudence and concepts that were invented in medieval jurisprudence to show up in it. So like in the Bronze Age, you didn't stand before a king in a court and plead your case to ask for redress, right? You did in the medieval period. So standrecht belies a like, you know, Bronze Age, Iron Age, medieval kind of transition of how jurisprudence is viewed. Hang on. Sorry, I get stuffly nose. I already talked about how the term chronic comes from Latin. Another is kammer, which is Kamer means like room. This is actually from Latin camera, which is from Greek kamara. Another one, I don't know if this is pronounced troon or troon. Either way, it means throne, which comes from Latin thronos, which comes from Greek thronos, right? So they have a Latin via Greek word for chair in a book written in like Latin. Their Proto-Italic wasn't even a language in 2000 BC, right? Another interesting one, here's a fun one, is Harne, which is actually, it means harbor. It's actually from the Dutch city of Harlingen slash Harns. So like the Big Apple, right? It's referring to a specific city in the name. This can't really refer to an ancient place. Now, one aspect I haven't touched about yet is that, to be fair, the Oera Linda Book is extremely concerned with places that Hammerschmidt lived and knew about, including, I think it's Frudom, which was the city in which he was a vicar. It's pretty coincidental that I will talk about that in a minute. It's pretty coincidental that this ancient book is so concerned with this city, this village, this town that Hammerschmidt happened to be a priest in. There's a lot of references to local places, like a kind of allegorical reference to like the literal urban plan of Frudom, of this town that Hammerschmidt lived in, as if the author had walked around the 1850s town of Frudom, right? This is a big one because I am reading a massive paper on, it's like a 400-page PDF, on Old English religious terms and the words used to refer to Asatru versus Christian worship, and like worship becomes increasingly used when Christianity takes over, because a big part of Christianity is like talking about how cool Yahweh is. That is literally what Christians are doing, where they're like, praise him, praise the Lord, right? Like they are saying good, they are talking about how cool Yahweh is. That is a religious act in Christianity, right? But that doesn't really show up in Asatru. Like, yeah, there's praise poetry, Asatru, Indo-European religion in general. Yeah, there's praise poetry, but like, you don't go to a Hof to talk about how cool Thor is as like the central religious act of your practice. One word that does show up with a lot of Asatru usage is bid, which we still use in English. I mean, to bid at an auction means to ask. But the more archaic usage of like, I bid thee well, fair knight, prithee, I bid that thou wouldst, means ask. You in the Havamal, there's like an 8-line verse where Odin is saying, the first 4 lines are about rune stuff, like divination, and then he says, you know how to offer, you know how to bloat, right? You know how to offer, right? You know how to kill an animal, right? You know how to send the carcass, right? He asks, it's like vase to something bidda, right? Bid, this word. That word bid shows up in the Oera Linda book. It means to ask for, means to ask for something. So when we do bloat, we do the 2-round structure, right? In the second round, when the receiving round, right? When, pardon my French, we have given the gods the gift, we are asking for something. I'm being a little simplistic about how we view it today, but that's the simple form of it, right? We are bidding for things. We are asking them to give us something or do something for us, or so on and so forth. That's why this word bid is used in Germanic religious terminology, because it is the asking that accompanies sacrifice, right? So why is it used by the Oera Lindians, by the Raldian faith, by the Freya faith, where they don't actually ask the divine for things, where they don't perform sacrifice? Why are they using ask as a word for prayer, which is an ossified term that, continental Germanic peoples just kept using this term meaning to communicate with the divine, when they just mean just like affirming loyalty to Ralda or whatever, rather than asking the gods for something, right? I've already talked about how the writing style and the syntax match modern Dutch. They also match Haverschmidt very, very cleanly. They match Over de Linde too. Over de Linde, the Winkler Jensma theory is that Over de Linde sketched out a lot of ideas and then Haverschmidt filled in a lot of them. Haverschmidt was a good writer, right? What else is here? So just as a comparison for language stuff, this text is taking place roughly 2200 BC to 50 BC, right? So for comparison, pi is spoken 4500 BC to 2500 BC. And then there's this murky period of what I'm just going to call West Pi, is West Proto-Indo-European, is spoken from 2500 BC to 500 BC, and languages are splitting off of this. And around 500 BC, West Pi becomes Proto-Germanic. So there's a linguistic timeline here, and granted, we're talking in the terms of centuries, right? There's a lot of wiggle room, but it doesn't line up with the genetic flows that we see, with the archaeological flows that we see, with the linguistic flows that we see. Why are these terms showing up in this text? Like, Latin is just splitting off from Celtic, and Proto-Italo-Celtic is just splitting off from what becomes Germanic when this stuff is taking place. Why are there words like text, the text, that x, the x in text is a pretty key, like very easily identifiable Latin, specifically Latin, not like just Oscan or Umbrian, but Latin phonological process. If you look at cognate words in Greek, in Sanskrit, in Germanic, they tended to either do k or t, right? They don't have this x kind of sound, right? The fact that there is an s at the end of the word is a demonstration that text, now granted, it could just be a made up nonsense word, but like, if it's not, it's coming from Latin, right? And this just doesn't line up with a lot of stuff that we see at this time. Like the thing about Friday, right? Like you would be forgiven for assuming it's like Freya's day, right? Freya and Frigga sound a lot alike, but it's the reason it's Friday is because it's Free's day. Frigg in Old Norse means the free one. Froya in Old Norse means the lady, right? So it's Friday is the free one's day, right? I want to talk about the ideology that goes forward from this, because there's this huge kerfluffle and it kind of simmers down, right? There never is like a Church of Ralda that develops. It kind of just becomes, academics were convinced it was a hoax, and that's just kind of what the history books said. I mean, I think my position and Witan East's position on this is pretty clear by now. But like, you know, academics say it's a hoax. That's what normies say. Okay, good enough, and it just kind of goes away. It becomes this sort of artifact of Frisian nationalism, and it belies a lot of these odd currents that you see near the Volkisch movement, right? Matriarchy, monism, lost civilizations, Atlantis, this anxiety that the north of Europe had over, simply put, not being as cool as Southern Europe. And the Greeks, the Romans, they had this long, glorious past. You know, ancient Greece, Western literature starts with the Iliad, which takes place like, just roughly, this isn't important, around 1000 AD. It was composed like 1000 BC. It was composed like 700 BC-ish, good enough. Frisia shows up for the first time like 50 AD as like not a glorious society with a literary tradition, right? There was a lot of anxiety in you can even see this into really relatively early in the modern period, like starting in the 1300s, even in Scandinavia, this anxiety over like, oh crap, Greece and Italy are cool. We actually are barbarians, and trying to come to terms with that, trying to understand the past, because it's really important to understand here. Northern Europe did not have a good handle on what Northern Europe was. If Nick wants, he can show up, he can put up the picture of the Holy Roman Empire. Germany as a construction was like really new. You know, there's the meme quote about was it Bismarck, who was like, I must unite the Germanic peoples under one flag, because that was new when he was doing that, like after the United States federal government had been created, because the idea of a singular united German nation, German people, like when certain social, they're like, this is better than you can find on some maps. Thank you, Nick. Why aren't Bavarians and Thuringians separate ethnoses? Well, it's because there was a movement to make them one thing. It's not a wrong thing to make them one thing by any means, but you know, the same, why are Bavarians Germans but the Dutch aren't? There's historical reasons for that. And certain socialists who had nationalist political ambitions, if you will, in the early 1900s, looked at this book very interestingly. So there was this guy by the name of Herman Wirth. He was into German ethnocentrism and matriarchy. There was a lot of these guys kind of bumping around in Germany in the early 1900s who were really big on like Prussian militancy. They really liked war and armies. And get this, what if the government was an army? Right? Like, what if the government existed for the army? Imagine how many Frenchmen they could kill if they did that. Just imagine it. It'd be amazing, right? And they didn't really know how to, I'm kind of paraphrasing because this is only sort of, it's where the Oera Linda book goes, but a lot of these people like Herman Wirth were a bit what we would call spurgy today, and they didn't know how to sell their ideology to women. So a lot of this like matriarchy stuff was very appealing to them because it allowed for them to slide women into their government ideas, right? Like there's like there's two governments, like there's the guy government and the girl government, right? Herman Wirth is one of these guys. Herman Wirth is part of this discussion within the Volkisch movement between what I'm just going to call racist matriarchy and neo-medievalism. These kind of communal socialist ideas, as opposed to like the rights of the father, the strengthening of the family as a corporate body. Like, does the government create families, and afterwards, do families continue to exist because of the government? Or are families just like a provisional structure for the purposes of raising children that the government like lets you have? Right? You feel me here? This is an important question at this time. And Wirth was on team matriarchy, and he was also big on original Aryan monotheism. There's a lot of people at that time who didn't like a lot of the things in Christianity, but they also wanted to keep a lot of these basic trappings. Monotheism is one of them. These people tended to be big into primitivism. Not everyone in the Volkisch movement. I'm talking about a specific current. Matriarchy, original monotheism, primitivism, right? Through 1933 to 1935, there is this conflict within the Volkisch movement that I'm just going to call Bavarian Jesus versus Aryan monotheism. And scholars at this time aren't having fun with a lot of this because it's all kind of silly. But Herman Wirth found out about the Oera Linda book, and he was really into it. And scholars in Germany saw all the stuff that the Dutch had said about it and weren't very big fans of it. But someone heard about Wirth's interest, and that was Himmler, Heinrich Himmler. Himmler actually founded the Ahnenerbe in part to defend certain claims in the Oera Linda book, because Himmler was just in love with this whole thing. Himmler was really big into witches. He loved the idea of like National Socialist witches, which is an interesting kind of, it's not what you think of when you hear those two. You don't think of that as a combination. But within the National Socialist hierarchy, Amt Rosenberg, the office around Rosenberg, who was like the Reichsminister for Culture or something like that, they really didn't like the Oera Linda book because they didn't like the matriarchy stuff. They didn't like the pacifism. And so there was this growing feud within the two camps about like, is this subversive or not, right? And part of this is that like nutters like Carl Maria Villegut got drawn into the debate. Like Villegut was like actually insane. Like he got thrown in an asylum for being criminally insane against his will because he was like a delusional schizophrenic and violent to his wife. And so when he got let out, I'm kind of digressing because this is just a fun story, because Villegut is the guy who got von List blacklisted in Germany, right? Villegut, Karl Maria Villegut, he gets thrown in an asylum because he's insane. And then the Weimar government lets him out because they run out of money because of the whole like economic collapse. So they just like let the crazy people out of asylums. So he goes around Germany as Karl Weistor and eventually gets into Himmler's circle. And I don't think he was a super big fan of the Oera Linda book, but he is the guy that blacklists von List. Right? There's a question of why don't more people listen to von List? It's because of Villegut saying, no, von List, I don't like him. I disagree with him. He gets the chopping block. So in 1934, the critiques of the Oera Linda book start increasing and mounting, particularly as German scholarship stops looking at this as this is a hoax, this Dutch guy wrote this portion, this Dutch guy wrote that portion, the paper is doctored kind of a thing, and starts looking at this more ideologically as this book is purporting the original Dutch monotheism, and it doesn't have a good opinion of Germans. It has a pretty low opinion of Germans and Scandinavians, and an extremely high opinion of the Dutch, which the National Socialist government didn't really like. Again, Woden in this book is a human chieftain who is like seduced by Oriental papal magic. It doesn't have a high opinion of Germans, right? And so it actually gets put on the forbidden books list in 1937. Himmler got overruled, and the reasonings for this being this book promotes Frisian supremacy, which is kind of an odd thing to be concerned about. Just saying that out loud, it's like the dangers of Frisian supremacy. But it's extremely anti-German. It's trying to emphasize a separation of the Dutch from the Germans. I don't mean to be mean, but I'm just going to repeat the claim. It accuses the Germans of being Slavic half-breeds. That wasn't something that people in the National Socialist government liked hearing. It promotes a pacifistic communist matriarchy. Also, Wirth was just publicly defeated by real scholars. Herman Wirth, this guy who was friends with Himmler, was publicly defeated by real scholars. And this humiliated a lot of the National Socialist leadership, because it's like, oh crap, we look like morons because one of our own is promoting this goofy nonsense. The line that Gensma gives about this is that it was, this is a quote in English, but falsified in the wrong direction was the general idea amongst the National Socialist leadership. And so it got put on the forbidden book lists, or forbidden books list, pardon my French. After the war, what happens to this Herman Wirth guy? he actually rebrands as like a primitivist anti-fascist, and he ended up becoming big in hippie and greenie circles. The people who today you would think would hear like, oh my goodness, pacifistic communist matriarchy, that's amazing, right? And then it's like, oh, this guy was a Nazi, what? And through Worth's rebranding, the book kind of becomes part of the new age. Worth he got captured by the Allies in 1945 and kept in prison, and then they realized, oh, he's one of the harmless kind of kooks, and so they just let him out. And the book actually got taken up. There was a lot of interest in it by Native Americans, by like Amerindian tribes in the 1970s, because of like the whole, back to the land, nature kind of aspect of it. It's an interesting thing, because if you hear like communist matriarchy, original monotheism, you don't think of European governments. You typically think of the New Age, where it's not like this is a core plank of New Agery or anything, but it does seem more at home in that fundamentally it is positing, again, going back to this as a work of theory fiction, because there's two kind of strains through this discourse of this book is a fabrication of an ancient text. And I skipped over this in my ramble, I'm sorry. Part of the story of how Cornelis Overder Linden actually got this book to the attention of the archivists was because he made a fake ancient translation of Warp van Thorb's The Chronicles of Friesland, which is like a 16th century text, right? And he refused to give it to the archivists unless they also took a look at the Oera Linda book. And this is where Verwees's failings as a scholar come in, because he was like, oh, well, we just have to go along with this. We simply can't be too critical of this thing, But this book is positing, so this is a fake ancient text like strain. But there's also like the literary theory of like, what is this book actually saying? It's talking about an alternative origin for the white race and an original Frisian monotheism that derives from a monotheistic, matriarchal, communistic society that does not have inheritance. It does not have strong privileging of the father's role, not as opposed to privileging the mother's role, but like a focus on the father as a defining characteristic of the family. It's very utopian in its outlook, right? By comparison, father, mother, sister, daughter, like these words in Indo-European languages are all very closely related because they are derived from an Indo-European conception of the family as being like the small state of the father. Like a woman, linguistically, in the words we use, a woman leaves her father's household and journeys to her husband's household and becomes part of his family, right? This is a radically different idea of religion and society than what we really see in. If this is true, then we modern Europeans are heretics in a certain sense, not just because of like the whole Pope Dagon fish hat thing, but also like even with Christianity, our society is pretty patriarchal. Our society values inheritance and our society values family. And the Oera Linda book views like people getting their own houses as a decline into wickedness. I'm not the Gothi on the Witan on this program, but I mean, would you agree, sir, that this text is effectively something like heresy in a certain sense?
I mean, yeah, for sure. That's part of I think that was part of the allure for it. Kind of like I mentioned at the top of the show, our folk have this this need to find the truth no matter how hidden it is, and sometimes we'll happen across something that's so kind of ridiculous on the face of it, like the Oera Linda book and the ideals in there that because it's such the opposite of what we have been told to be true and what we know to be true, that we think, okay, well, that's just how hidden this was. You know, it was the exact opposite of everything we thought. No, I mean, Western society, Aryan society, white people society, whatever you want to call it, is patriarchal. Not that we like that women are beneath us as men or whatever. You know, that didn't start until Christianity came in, actually. But yeah, you know, the man protects and provides and fights. The woman creates the home and nurtures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And
So,
even that idea of like the home as like the Savich home is distinct from the East home, like that is something the Oera Linda book doesn't really like. Like the ideal society, according to this, is people living in like a communal, everyone shares things fortress. You know,
when they mention the corruption of the bronze-skinned, curly-haired, gold earring people coming in, it was like part of the like, ooh, bad times are coming, is like people got their own houses.
and like their own yards. Like the Oera Linda, like getting a front yard is a sign of decadence in this society, which is actually an interesting thing regarding like land usage that kind of dates this. Like if you look at some parts of America, you get this odd like a long road and a bunch of very thin lots going down the road with long backyards, and the houses are all up front. It's referred to as like French allotments or something in some parts of the world. That is literally a European thing. It came about because you want the house close to the road or the river so you can move stuff in your stores into the wagon that goes on the road. The lots are very thin because all of the peasants come out and they go lot by lot doing like moving down the lot in a kind of assembly line fashion. They're very thin to make it easier to move across the lots. They're very deep to maximize area for agriculture. So like that concern about like front yards, backyards reflects an extremely modern. Because like you go back to the Bronze Age, it's like you tell like Huacanhualios his front yard, and he's like, "What do you mean my front yard? There's woodland around my house where it's not a farm.
Yeah,
there's no yard. I don't have a lot. Well, my land ends where Huachualians cattle live. You know,
right." Even in Tacitus's Germania, one of the things he noted about our ancestors, the Germans, big Germanic peoples, which includes the Frisians, or the Frizii, as he called them, by the way, is that, yeah, we had yards, that houses were not next to each other. We liked our a little bit of privacy. But I guess, you know, if you're a believer of the Oera Linda book, you could just frame that as, aha, well, that's after the Frisians were defeated and corrupted and split, and some of them joined the Saxmen, as the book calls them. So
this book doesn't really have much currency today. If you go looking, you can find pictures of some women in like leather skirts with odd ponytails doing rituals around fire, but it's always the same pictures from the same crop. So I think that might have been more of like a stunt or something. As far as what I could tell, very minor neo-pagan influence outside of rather extreme Dutch conspiracy theory stuff. But even then, like this text is so kind of radical in its conception of the world and what it wants out of the world that it's very much like this. They're hiding our history. They don't want us to know, but we have the truth. We have to expose them. Well, who's them? Yeah, you know, like the Magian conspiracy, like the Magian conspiracy trying to hide the truth of matriarchy. Like it's a kind of silly premise on its face if you start with it, you know.
yeah, it, you know, it's all a mess. One interesting thing I was kind of verifying on my phone here on the side with the history of how the story part of the Oera Linda book ends, if I'm not mistaken, is kind of the Jewish people, basically. They corrupt the area and they make everybody evil for wanting houses and material things, and women buy jewelry and their kids go hungry or whatever it says. And it mentions how the essentially the land, Eartha, that was the other thing I meant to cover theologically. Earth was almost seen as a goddess in a way, not explicitly, but they called it Eartha, which is, a Germanic word where we get earth from, and it would Nerthus, essentially, or Yorth. And so I brought that up because of a different point, but anyway, it's something also to keep in mind. The Eartha, or the earth, the land itself of Friesland, Frisia, starts falling apart as the people become corrupt. The land beneath them, which they are tied to, but also not tied to because that's bad or whatever, the land starts falling apart. And I don't know that it says it outright, but it's really, really hinted that that's kind of what caused the climate issue that made the Frisii leave, and then the Frisians, which are related, come back.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it's talking about, where it says, my mother and I joined the Sax men, etc. Is the Frisii left and just joined surrounding Germanic tribes, which were the same people anyway, Angles and Saxons, etc. And then they just rehabited the area later once the flooding had gone down, and it kind of became somewhat habitable again. So that's they take so many little nuggets of truth and real actual history, like the emphasis on all white people are related. Well, that's true, but as Gothi mentioned, as Chris pointed out, not in the way they're saying.
Yeah, it's also interesting that kind of Fisher King aspect of it, because in the Torah, why does Israel suffer when the Jews stray? Well, it's because Yahweh is punishing them. Yahweh is tightening the screws, pardon the joke, tightening the screws on the Jews when they stray from his will. He is inflicting the punishment. But in more European Fisher King ideas, it's no, there's a bonding between the king and the land. The king marries the land goddess, and they're intertwined. So if you cut the king's legs off, trees don't grow as tall, right? Lacking either of those, it's kind of well, why does the land suffer when they stray from Geralda? Maybe there's something deeper in there that I'm just missing, but it's kind of but what ties them to the land? If it was afflicting them as people, it would make sense. But they've got the I think Gensma compares it to the reflection of the divine in them because of the monism. So how can the land fall apart if the people are straying? Wouldn't the innate goodness of Geralda keep the land together?
What? Yeah, kind of. There's a story within the story it tells of a good Frisian woman named Adela, and her children, or some children or whatever, are in some predicament where there's a fire and they're caught in a high place, and so they're either fall or get burned by the fire. And Adela tells the mother of these kids, if you believe in Geralda enough, you will be able to make it through the fire. Your faith in him will give you strength, and you'll be unharmed by the fire and be able to rescue your children. Something along those lines. And I guess it's because they were corrupted and they became Asatru, basically, in this story. They lost faith in Geralda, and so Geralda no longer protected them. And it kind of goes back to that concept of all good things come from Geralda. The only bad and stupid and evil things come from our own foolishness.
Yeah, I don't. You're the Gothi here, sir, so you can give a more official position, but I don't really see that kind of attitude in Indo-European religions. Yes, the gods give good things, but not literally all good things ever at every level,
Yeah, I mean, the world is beautiful and all because it's beautiful, and you could say, well, yeah, the All-Father and his brothers made it beautiful, and sure, but yeah, I don't know. Also, atheists are able to have good lives all the time. Jackson Crawford specifically thinks anybody who practices Asatru is a fool. He probably makes enough money to live a decent life, and the gods themselves are not going to come down from on high and take all his nice things from him for being a dork. That said, if they did, that'd be funny, and I would applaud them for that, but it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, it's not like Thor is turning the good things crank, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna start turning it the other way if you stray, bro.
Yeah, right.
It's not like that, like it is in this kind of monistic cosmology, from what I see.
Yeah, no, it's not. No mention of that in the Halvamal or the Eddas.
But at some point, you don't have to spend 25 years to build one church or one Hoth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. Let's see. We got two more questions from Hamawiz. First one. Speaking of Magi, I remember reading from something that the Muslims called the Norsemen that invaded Muslim Spain, Majus or Magi in Arabic. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, so there's a number of terms that refer to pagans in the Islamic world. The original one is kafir, which it's often translated as unbeliever, but it means something more like rejecter, disbeliever, because Islam means submission, but the conception of it intellectually is that it more so means the message, the testament, right? So it what do you call people who reject the testament? They're rejectors, that's the kind of word for non-Muslims in Islamic usage. But when Islam comes to blows with Persia and defeats it pretty shockingly effectively, Majusi becomes a slur used to refer to Zoroastrians in general. You can kind of see that Zoroastrians, the people who do what the Magi say, Magi-ians, right? If we call Jews Rabbi-ians. You can occasionally see this actually done with Hinduism, where they'll call them Brahmanists or Brahmanites or whatever, the people who follow the Brahmins, right? This term Majusi ends up getting applied to a lot of groups. It just means pagan. It doesn't necessarily link, because it means pagans in general, right? I would imagine there might be some kind of nuance there that I might not be picking up from what little I know about how it works, but yeah. So
the second question is kind of an extension of the first one. I didn't realize that till now. He says it could have been because fire was a central element in Asatru shrines, or maybe because the Magi of Persia were a high caste and thus resembled the Norse physically. It's hard to tell what they mean. That could have played into it, I think, but it's probably mostly just what Chris said.
I did Google this real quick, and I do find some speculation that some practices such as cremation could be misinterpreted as fire worship, which is important because Zoroastrians do literally worship fire in as much as they believe that fire is a god entering one of their gods entering our dimension. And when the fire goes out, the god goes back to the fire dimension. This is also how Hindus conceptualize fire traditionally. This is involved in Buddhism too, because it's there's a parable about how nirvana works. And it's no, they do not understand fire like we do, right? But anyways, so Zoroastrians are really big on fire. Their priests wear a mask over their face, so that way they can't spit in it by accident or breathe into it, because they do not want to impurify the fire. So Zoroastrians don't do cremation. They also don't like impurifying the earth with druj, with ritual impurity caused by rot. So what they'll do is they'll they do the sky burials where they leave the body to be picked apart by birds, which is pretty grisly. I'd imagine that generates more ritual impurity than a burial does, but whatever. But in Islam, fire worship is something that Muslims are primed to recognize. Like in Christianity, there's like the thing from Judaism about like Gentiles are just innately drawn to worshiping rocks and trees and statues. We just can't help ourselves. It's just a facet of Gentile existence, right? And in Islam, they have a similar kind of, it's not a pejorative, I don't know what to call it, like a pejorative mindset that like, yes, fire worship. That's what non-Abrahamic, non-Muslims do. So I guess it could have something like, maybe that's why the term, like, because it's not like Christians and Jews do much with fire, but like a lot of other religions, not just Asatru, but a lot of other religions do stuff with fire. So I could see maybe Majusi has some kind of favoring towards like non-Abrahamic non-Muslims, whereas kafir is more all-inclusive, more technical. They are rejecting rejecting Islam as opposed to I don't know, like just generic, they do something different,
Well, I guess that is it for questions.
Do we have any?
I'm trying to think of like final thoughts on the Oera Linda book. I would say I wouldn't discourage anyone from reading it. I wouldn't discourage anyone from reading anything, typically. Any adult, maybe. I wouldn't discourage any adult from reading things they want to read, including the Oera Linda book. It is fascinating, and like, yeah, the guy's kind of a goofy writer, and he made so many mistakes in trying to make it look ancient that it is easy to clown on him. But like, if you just look at the poeticism, if that's a word, poetry of the language that he uses when he's kind of crafting this stuff, it's neat. Someone in the live chat, I think it was our folk builder Aiden in Indiana, he said that it kind of resembles the Silmarillion a bit. And yeah, I could see that, and it's kind of neat, I guess. Like I said, it'd make a great fantasy novel or a video game or like a D&D shoot off or something,
A movie
yeah.
A movie would actually be pretty interesting. Like, it's an interesting idea to humor and think about, like, what would this society look like? What would it be like to live in it? What kind of drama would there be, right? Like, it's not like it's wrong to humor these ideas. This is what Plato was doing with the Republic. Like, we're going to make a fictional society so I can make a point. There's nothing immoral about that. I think the problem is that this is easy fodder for people to get bogged down in, like, exposing the truth. The elites don't want us to know. Like, matriarchy is free. I have 5 matriarchs in my house.
Right.
It becomes like conspiracy fuel as opposed to something that, like, yeah, this is an interesting way to think about religion and philosophy. Myself and Witan East happen to disagree with the conclusions of that religion and philosophy, but like, there's nothing wrong with humoring the idea and thinking about it. As this Nick's question, the why, was that you, Nick, Sir Nick?
Yeah, it would be.
No, it's the other person that types in the chat.
I don't.
Okay. Why is this a thing? Why are we talking about it? Where's the bit that people are hanging on to that makes it a thing to merit asking us about all the time? It's a thing.
We'll come back to your thing, Aiden. Sorry. Go on, sir. I tried to say it to not forget it.
Oh, yeah. It's a thing because Chris explained it pretty well. So in the Volkish movement of the mid to late 19th century, and then the 20th century, there were kind of two camps. There was and both of them had their flaws, don't get me wrong, but one of them was a lot more correct on Aryan or Germanic history and prehistory than the other one. And again, so Meister Guido von List, he's one of our Heiligmen, one of our heroes. He is the hero who has his own shrine at Odenshof, and he very much deserves that. Even he, who was on the more correct side of the two sides about our history, was not largely, but pretty wrong about some of the battles between the Romans and the Germans. Anyway, all that I digress. So the other side of that was kind of the Oera Linda Book side of like, whoa, what if our ancestors were matriarchal people who got really mad if you had a backyard or whatever. Why we are talking about it is because of that thing I mentioned at the beginning of the show, where our people want to find the truth no matter what, and it's for lack of a better word, it's almost a naivete, I guess, kind of like, well, this is so far from what I've been taught, and the Oera Linda is so hidden, and it's so fanatically debunked or decried, I guess, by its detractors that it must be true. And I get that. I get thinking that. And there are cases where something, if academics are yelling at you about how wrong it is, it very well might be because it's true. For example, the current academic stance is that Anglo-Saxons weren't real. I'm sitting here talking to you. I'm right here. It's like the Sopranos thing where the Romans went. You're looking at them, asshole. Excuse my language. So academics do say silly things, and they're often ridiculous people. But with the Oera Linda Book, unfortunately, it's one of those things where the academics are right. And I would never tell any individual academic directly that they're correct, because I'd never hear the end of it, but they're right on this. What makes it a thing to merit asking us about all the time is, I kind of answered that already. It's just it was part of this early Volkish movement, and it's been hidden because it's fake, it's wrong. And that makes it interesting. Go ahead.
I think there's another why to ask about that is why make this, which I've kind of touched on a few things here. So Gensma lays out, and again, a lot of the Goff Gensma, it's Dutch. I'm sorry. A lot of the research and study on this text is reliant upon his book unto itself, tracing literally the history of the physical book at times, right? Like, here's something I haven't mentioned yet. I told you how it was like, there's like a first half and a second half, and the second half is kind of sucky in terms of just writing style and the like. That's because, remember how I said that Over de Linden wouldn't send that copy of the other fake book to the archivist unless the Over de Linden book went along with it? It's because he hadn't finished translating, transcribing, whatever you want to call it, antiquifying the second half yet, because Haverschmidt hadn't written it. So they had to speed run making the second half of this text, which is why it blows, right? And Gensma had to go through a lot of work to Gensma. I keep saying Gensma. It's Gensma. Sorry, Gensma. Whatever. Gensma had to go through a lot of work to figure out the history of this text and its history, and it is a pretty big thing. So he does have to answer, like, okay, you pointed out all the flaws in it, but why does it exist? There is a book that you can go to a museum and leaf through and cut the paper in half to look at what's inside it. Why does it exist? And this is his ultimate summation. Fun. The first one is that it's fun. This is a gag game thing that people in Europe did at the time. These were very common. Fake histories, fanciful histories were very, very common. The guy, the pro-Catholic guy that Henry VIII had executed, he wrote Thomas More, was it? I think it was. He wrote a utopian novel about this basically doing what I've been suggesting here. He writes a fictional account of this fanciful land as if it was real in order to prove a philosophical point. And that was a thing, and it got taken way out of control by people who wanted this to be something. And there is a critique of Christianity that this book makes that amounts to, if you can decipher the Oera Linda Book and see all of the horse hockey, you can do that with the Bible, right? Like, I mean, why does Jesus ride 2 donkeys into Jerusalem? It's because someone didn't know what the specific wording of a Jewish messianic prophecy meant, right? Like, you think a cleric wouldn't notice this stuff? He spends all day studying the Bible, right? Like, he would have been, whether his criticisms and ideas are legitimate or not, it doesn't really matter, right? He would have been in the ideal position to see the flaws in the Bible as a text, and he literally cannot say them. That had to weigh on his conscience. In the case of Over de Linden, Cornelis, it's just a matter of fame. This made him famous. He has a book named after him. Granted, it's a bizarre, fake, neo-pagan hoax kind of thing, but like, he goes down in history. Like, every time someone hears about Frisian nationalism from now on, this has to be attached to it. Because, well, what about this? I think Aidan, apprentice folkbuilder Aidan McMillan brought up a good point regarding the Book of Veles, which is a relatively similar Slavic kind of ancient chronicle passed down by a family that has the truth, right? I think texts like this give easy answers. They give something that you can easily map things onto without having to do any of the hard work. And we, in the reforging of Asatru, have had to do a lot of hard work in, simply put, making this religion something that is real and that people do. And like, theology is about truth, but like, religion is structures to do things. If the gods want us to do X, these structures that make X maximized are the structures we do, right? Like, we have spent a lot of time and effort in, I say we, you know what I mean, we as a collective, I've spent a lot of time and effort making this real, and that's really daunting when you think about how much work we still have to do. We always could use more folk builders. And it's very tempting to take everything you know and just tweak it a little bit. Like, oh, the Bible, but pagan. Oh, the Israelites, but European. Oh, the monotheistic creator deity, but Europe. Oh, society, but matriarchy. Oh, religion, but atheism, right? It's very tempting to do these very easy little tweaks on something that you already know that doesn't require you to, like, what does religion look like if you have multiple deities? Like, that's a hard question. Imagine being Founder McNallen and having to, like, all right, what does religion look like if there's multiple deities? You know, like, that's hard to enact in reality. And things like the Oera Linda Book and the Book of Veles make these easy. I think in Western society, the supremacy of the Bible, like, Bible literally comes from Greek biblos. It is the book. Like in Spanish, it's like La Santa Biblia, the holy book. No, like the book that is holy, right? I think the supremacy of the Bible makes it very tempting for people to have a central authoritative text that you can just do endless interpretation of, but it also has like literal rules. Like, the text tells people how to live their lives in a lot more of a thou shalt not way than like Havamal does or Homer does. And I think it's very tempting for some people to, if they can't find that in the ancient world, they need to make it. And not in, like, you know, there are things that we don't have yet that should be made, but it's a difference between like coming up with a universal book of prayers or something, as opposed to like making up a fictional lineage of how Steve McNallen descends from like this ancient Viking priest king or something. You know what I mean? Like, but that would make things easier. And part of truth is doing things when they're hard because they're true rather than the easy lie. It sounds like you want to say something, sir, so go on.
That last point you made actually is exactly what I was going to say. The easy path and the correct path are seldom the same one. It'd be great if they were the same one. They're usually not, unless it's like some stupid easy moral decision, you know what I mean? Yeah, I guess the kind of the closing message the bow I want to put on this episode is that while the Oera Linda book was not written with good intentions per se, any of you here that are upset that we did this or listening to this because you were interested in the Oera Linda book, but you're not necessarily upset, I believe that you are here for the right reasons because you believe the Oera Linda book to be something about your people and something genuine and real, and it's not. But that desire to want to do something for your people and to do something genuine and to escape from the Abrahamic hive mind faiths, being here is the correct step in that direction. If you're listening to this and you're not an AFA member yet, you should be. You know, if you're a heterosexual white person who has not committed super egregious crimes and whatnot, runestone.org/join. If you have any questions about membership or membership requirements or disqualifying things, you can reach out to any of our leadership, or you can email gothar@runestone.org, etc. Yeah, Oera Linda book's not real. Let me see something. Yeah, Oera Linda book's not real. Asatru is what's real. We can verify that through texts that are, that's something we didn't touch on, I guess, is even our lore that was written down by a Catholic politician and whatever was written down 700, 800 years before the Oera Linda book was, and was passed down orally way before that. What were you going to say, Chris?
Oh, I just, one thing, I mean, it's going to bug me if I don't say this. I want to just make a point that Jensma makes here about, if we look at our lore, it is a hodgepodge, a bricolage, a mixture of all sorts of things. Like there's the Havamal possibly is several texts stitched together in a sense, you know. The Poetic Edda is literally a poetry collection. I think that if you look at it, there's enough of these listing out kennings, listing out names that there probably is an order to the madness, but it's clearly a lot of different things by a lot of different people. If you look at the Bible, it's clearly a lot of different things by a lot of different people. Even the Old Testament, which is trying to tell the story of Israel, has pretty radical tone shifts in what Israel looked like and what the concerns of the author are, right? The Oera Linda book has a pretty consistent single-mindedness to it because it's made by one author's vision of the world, right? I think it's telling in regards to the, like, what does authenticity look like? What does it look like when you authentically pull a lot of poems out of an oral tradition? It's pretty messy, and it takes a lot of figuring things out. And these people do not think like we do, you know, and we have to spend a lot of time and effort going back and figuring out how they thought and looking at what they were doing to make sense of the eternal principles that they are passing down through their own way, right? And I guess this is kind of repeating the truth is hard, lies are easy thing, but I think it's also a matter of, like, there is something to be said about the singularity of a monotheistic text as opposed to the kind of plurality of a polytheistic text. There's a lot to say about the world, you know, and if you if you're going to say things about the world, it's probably not going to be just a singular concern. You know, there's going to be a lot of periods where it's like, all right, it's now time for something different. You know.
Yeah. So, to quote the opening words of the Oera Linda book, Aki, my son, never let a priest go over these words. Well, priests did go over these words. The other guest I was going to have on here, I asked Gothi Stan before I asked Chris, because I know he was raring to, take a few hits of the Oera Linda book as well. So it was multiple priests have.
I hope I did you good, Gothi Stan.
Oh yeah, he was singing your praises earlier in the chat with the linguistic stuff, especially.
I had to get really educated on this book really fast.
Yeah, I learned more. Like before this, I learned more about it than I will ever need to know about anything. And then you like doubled that.
Yeah,
which made me feel a little bad for you for asking you to be on here, having to cram all that at the last minute. But
it's fine. It's good content.
Yeah, it lasted a few hours. Yeah,
I like it. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sirs.
That's high praise from Rob. But yep. All right, we are gonna call it a night. We have no more questions, and I'm sick of talking about this book.
Oh yeah. That's the kind of sucky thing. It's like, man, we spent 3 hours on this, but we shouldn't have to.
Yeah. Hopefully
man.
we've swayed some people. At the very least, we've made them very angry, and we'll get some kind of response soon. But I think mostly we did good.
We set a precedent.
Yeah.
We set a precedent for the AFA.
Yeah. When I went to the Allsherjargoði and the rest of the Witan with this idea, I was like, yeah, let's debunk the Oera Linda book. They're all like, is this necessary?
Yeah.
No, but it's fine. But all right, guys. I hope to see as many of you as possible at the dedication, which we have 106 people RSVP'd, so I'm going to see a lot of people at dedication.
I'm one of them.
All right.
I'll be there.
Sounds good.
You all there?
Perfect. All right. So, yep, December 6th is that dedication. As soon as that's over, I will start plugging the premiere event for my Hoff, Decent Thing in February. There we go. Look at that cool flyer my wife made. Neat colors. Okay. So, yep. All right. Hail the ICER, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and never forget, victory never sleeps. Night, everybody.
Night.